to speak with the director and curator of the Jamaica Music Museum. We're talking about Herbie Miller, no stranger to this space. It's that time of year again for Groundation, and Herbie Miller joins me on the phone lines. Herbie, you there? Not
here, Miss Cabo.
All right, Miss Cabo. Okay, all right. So you're gonna go with me. So good morning, Mr. Herbie.
Morning, Miss Cabo. All right, sister.
Yeah, it's good to have you online, my brother. As usual, we're inside of February again. And Groundation, of course, kicked off last Sunday and is running through the entire month of February once per week. And that's every Sunday. This year, tell us a theme this year.
African to Jamaican. Music and creolized black culture.
All right. Break that down for us.
That's breaking it down.
Mm-hmm.
In simple terms, we came here as Africans.
Mm-hmm.
And between then and now, there's a process that we had to deal with, having encountered different Africans from different African nations.
Yes.
Different languages, in many ways, even different philosophies and spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
But we had to communicate and come together to overcome, as our brethren Bob said, the liquor struggle.
Yeah.
And of course, all that collided with a Eurocentric dominance that we also had to pop and get around, as Lou would say.
Mm-hmm.
So we use culture, we use music, dance, etc. to, as a bridge, you indicated earlier on, how culture carries is a conveyor of our history and how it can assist in building back ourselves, our relationship to Mother Africa.
Yes.
And in a nutshell, that's what African to Jamaican represents.
Yeah, I really love a theme this year. Well, the theme every year is always so thoughtful, and that lends itself to such a wide range of discussion issues, and I'm sure this is what is happening again this year. So the first one was last week. My apologies, I was scheduled to be there at a very integral level, but I couldn't make it at the last minute, and I know you got my apologies, Herbie, and I'm just doing that to you personally now. My apologies again.
And from me to you,
yes,
I you know.
Yes, thank you, Herbie. Thank you. Yes. Thank you. And so today again, and I know you're up early as usual, but earlier than usual because today again at the Institute of Jamaica, we're looking at the second day. So tell us about what's happening today, and then let's just go through the rest of the month.
All right. Well, let me just do a recap of last week. You should have been there, but you were unable to.
Yes.
And of course, your sister took the chair on your behalf.
Oh, thank her so much, Professor Rosalie Hamilton.
Yeah, precisely.
Yes.
We had Honorable Nabili Tunis, Minister of Tourism, Cultural Affairs, Sierra Leone, who provided an overview of the Africa Call to Jamaica and the Caribbean, highlighting recent initiatives by the Republic of Sierra Leone to foster deeper diplomatic and cultural and economic ties with Jamaica and the broader Caribbean. And Professor Hamilton, as the honorary counsel, she brought some very insightful updates on how the benefit that thing would work.
Yes.
A young Princeton scholar, Fulbright Salwa Holloway, her parents are Sierra Leoneans, and she made the connection through the Gumbe drum, which is not an African drum, but a Jamaican development, which went back to Sierra Leone and through West Africa.
Yes.
So, and then we learned so much more about that relationship between our two nations, spanning all the way back to the earliest Maroon War. So today's topic is called African roots, Jamaican fruits, from folk traditions to contemporary cultural arts.
Yes.
Our moderator, Pauline Douglas, will engage Professor Maureen Warner Lewis, who will enlighten us about the
Oh, that's brilliant. I mean, you couldn't get any better than that. That's like top shelf.
Well, you know, Professor Warner, the Lewises, both professors.
Yes. I mean, how work on African retention, especially African retention in the language and culture, but language is phenomenal. Professor Maureen Warner Lewis. Wow, yeah, that's going to be brilliant.
Well, she has again graciously agreed to come and do a presentation at Ground Nation.
Yes.
And it will benefit all of our jammers immensely.
Of course.
And of course, our brethren, Clinton Hutton,
will
talk Kumina as an Afro-Atlantic transformation.
Creme de la creme. Today's creme de la creme. Well, last week too, but creme de la creme we're talking about. So Professor Maureen Warner Lewis, Dr. Clinton, Professor Clinton Hutton. Yeah.
In cricket terms, you'd say they come 1 down and 2 down.
Yes.
and we have the Guara, Terry, Kumina dance and music and drumming group to top the afternoon.
Okay.
Week 3 is February 15th. It's called Work in the Spirits. Religion, rituals, music, dance, and magic. And the moderator is, again, your sister in Amina Blackwood.
Yes.
And Dr. Leantonette Steins will do a presentation, which I am anticipating because Leantonette is so deep in her research.
I am telling you.
It's like long time we are praying.
Yes. So, and as a Yoruba, I think she's a Yoruba high priestess, isn't she, Leantonette?
She's ordained, that's all.
Yes, of course.
And then the Lakatko United and Dance Force, with Sheely as the founder and choreographer, will again come this serious drumming and dance.
Wow.
All invoking ancestral how the ancestral lineage has continued in many of us, and particularly on Kabu. Then the final week, it's called Jamaica to the World. Marcus Garvey, Pan-Africanism and Rastafari. The moderator is Professor Hopton Dunn, who just completed his tenure in, I think it was
in Botswana.
It was Botswana.
Yes, Botswana and South Africa. Yes.
So he's back home with us, and he so willingly agreed to moderate.
That's good. He was in the studio with us a few weeks ago, talking about Botswana and South Africa. Yes, it was brilliant.
Another deep thinking Jamaican man. Now we should have had my brethren Professor Basil Wilson on the final week, but for some situations beyond his ability to travel right now.
Okay.
Some just he has been dealing with some sight problem recently. He had to. I'm looking for someone to fill that final week. Indeed, it might be Muta. I'm going to reach.
So listen, it's Muta, because I was just going to say Muta. So Muta, we say Muta, so it's Muta.
Well, it's going to be Muta,
As long as he's on the island, I'm sure he won't say
who again, he's such a great supporter of Ground Nation.
I know.
For the work that I do.
Yes.
And then one Herbie Miller will do a presentation entitled Garvey Lives, Music and the Arts as Black Aesthetics and Pan-Africanist Consciousness.
All right, see that. No, this is, you have, and it, as if it gets better every year. And it's not to say that the year before wasn't excellent, It's just that every year it really does present, it's like you're always stepping into a whole different area of discourse. for which there's a vacuum on the island, and this is how it's reading for me this year. It really is brilliant. Love a theme: African to Jamaican music and creolized black culture. We can't spell Creole. We can't spell Creole with K though. Like say K-R-I-O-L-I-Z.
You see the Kikongo business is so deep in your soul that you express it in every move you make and every talk you talk. All right, yes. I'll use Kikongo next time.
There you go. Congratulations.
Funny enough,
Yes.
Let me just funny enough to show how this Western takeover is strong. Every time I spell certain words like creolize, it is forcing me to push it back to use an S.
Ah, it is because
and if you and your listeners realize too, when we're sending things like a little message,
is
after we tend to realize it didn't say what we want to say.
Yes, man.
It's because this AI thing is changing it.
I know. I do. Sometimes you look at it and you say, I'm not going to say a thing because everything wrong in that, but I'm sure he or she got the message. That's not what I meant, but I'm sure they got the message. I know, and this is one of it. I know I have that thing with the S too. So Herbie, we're out of time totally, because I have another guest.
Let me quickly say,
I'm going to give you a minute.
Jamaica, Institute of Jamaica, 10 to 16 East Street, corner of Tower Street, entrance on Tower Street, 2 p.m. each Sunday. It's free to the public. Thanks to our little sponsors this year and the big ones too who came up. Not as much as they used to because of this lady who visited us in September.
Yes. I'm feeling that.
But still we have a little morsel and a little beverage and good vibration and music. Please turn out, bring up your family friend.
How many years now this, Herbie? This is a whole lot of years though. How many years now?
It's 14th year, how time flies.
14. Yeah.
The very first one we honored the great Maestro Count Ozzy.
I know, I was there. Tempus Fugit.
Have moved on.
Yes, wow. I
Brother
remember
Sam,
that.
Brother Woody, Brother Alvaranga. Yeah, man. So
yeah, but congratulations on this work that you're doing.
Give thanks to you, to Irie and Mota for support over all these years, and to all media houses as well.
Our pleasure.
Quick word on the great Sly Dunbar. Let's honor him too.
Yes,
move
of
on,
course.
My brother. Join forces with your brethren, Robbie, and dub them all the way.
I love that. Thank you so much, Herbie Miller. Herbie Miller, of course, is the director-curator of the Jamaica Music Museum. We're going to go right back to the phone lines to speak with Dr. Devon Taylor, Executive Director of JABEM. A very short conversation with Devon, unlike the conversations we've been having over the years, and this is because we have a brother who's missing from JABEM, and he's going to be telling us a little bit about that. Can you let me know if we've got Devon on, because we've got just 8 minutes left before we go to talk about Cuba. In 8 minutes' time, we'll be talking about what's happening in Cuba, the United States, after attacking Venezuela, which many will say is Cuba's closest ally in recent times, and abducting its leader, kidnapping Nicolas Maduro, has effectively cut off Venezuela's oil supplies to Cuba. And in late January, you remember that the U.S. President Donald Trump called Cuba an unusual and extraordinary threat to national security and threatened to impose tariffs on any state that supplied oil or oil products to Cuba. So we're going to be having discussions on Cuba this morning. It's going to be broken, but in other words, we're going to be having our first guest at 7 o'clock and our second guest after 8 o'clock, a little bit after 8. And in between that, Pan-African Attorney at Law Bert Samuels will be talking about a whole other issue. So let me go to the phone lines to speak with Dr. Devon Taylor. Devon, you there?
Greetings, Cabo. Yeah,
Greetings,
I'm here.
greetings, greetings, my
Blessings.
brother. Usually we're talking about vexing issues regarding access to beaches and so on. And Jabem is one of the leaders at the forefront of the struggle and the activism for access to beaches across Jamaica, human rights issues around land and beaches. One of our own, though, Jabem's own, is missing. Talk to us about that, Devon.
Yes. So, Mr. Winston Monroe, who is also the chairman of the Greenwich Farm Fishing Village in Kingstown, and serves as Jabem community coordinator for both Kingstown and St. Catherine. Has been missing since the 5th of January. We have not been able to, get any contact from him. And so, the entire fishing community, the entire Jabem community, and his family are deeply, deeply concerned. To let your listeners know that, Mr. Monroe has done, a phenomenal job for the fishing community in Kingstown, right? He's done so much infrastructural development, Greenwich Farm Fishing Village, where, he's working on cold storage facility there that is almost complete and, up and running. He's very important in, there's the coming to suffer significant damage from Melissa in terms of many of the fishing docks that have been destroyed. And, we are working with Mr. Monroe and the community to really help the community to restore some of these fishing docks. These are very important work that he does. He represents the community in ongoing discussions, which regarding to the airport expansion and the dredging that is happening in the Kingston Harbor, and working to secure fishing grounds and protect the community from loss to their livelihood. So he's involved in compensation discussion, not only from airport expansion, but work that the port expansion is also having in the region, right? And he's a very senior figure in that space. So he carries a wealth of knowledge, just decades of knowledge. He has been involved critically in his Greenwich Farm community and other, at-risk community in the corporate area. So Mr. Monroe is a very, very critical, member.
Tell us about, for those, just in case, because when did he go missing, and do you know the circumstances around it, and where he was heading to, just in case somebody knows, someone saw him?
Yes. So, what we know, right, which is not a lot, right, is that, the community last saw him on the 5th of January. And, he was heading into Westmoreland to, do some work for his family. And that was the last, time anyone saw him. Right, so that is, to the extent that anyone knows is that, he left Kingstown, and head to Westmoreland. So we have not been able to really hear from him since then. And, this just have everyone deeply concerned, as to, his whereabouts. It's of course at this point now a law enforcement matter where, the police, is, checking, with every lead that they can get, interviewing everyone and just trying to figure out, what and, may have happened, We are keeping all hope alive, and that's why we are using all channels to reach out to the Jamaican people. To, we have his photo out there on our site, and saying that if you see someone that looks like Mr. Monroe, we have the phone numbers there on the flyer to reach out, to any police station.
So you call the Admiral Town, any police station, but of course the numbers are there for the Admiral Town Police Station, 876-922-5362. That's 876-922-5362. And the Marine Police HQ, 876-948-1778. That's 876-948-1778. And it's Mr. Winston Monroe. And he went missing when again, Devon?
January the 5th of January.
That's the last time he was seen. That's the last time he was seen. And not since. How is the family coping?
Well, these are just very difficult time for the family, and the community is giving them as much support, as we all can. But we can, understand, the situation there. It's a very emotional one.
Yes.
The fishing community in and around the corporate area. He also serves, on regional fishing bodies, representing the interests of fisher folks all across the region. So, when you have, he's a 67-year-old man, and just imagine the wealth of knowledge. I myself have learned so much from Mr. Monroe regarding, people think that there are no fishing goes on in Kingston to an extent, but Kingston have a very rich fishing history. Is the largest sprat ground in Jamaica. There are, I think, around 10 fishing.
Sorry to interrupt, Devon, because we're totally out of time. And Mr. Monroe, of course, was a chairman of the Greenwich Town Fisherfolk Benevolent Society and a community coordinator for Jabem, Kingston and St. Andrew. Thank you so much, Devon. Please tell us, keep us updated as to any information that you've received, Mr. Monroe.
Thank you very much.
All right, Dr. Devon Taylor there, founding director of Jabem. And of course, we're going to be going to our next interview, Professor Isaac Saney. Professor Isaac Saney is a Black Studies and Cuba specialist and coordinator of the Black and African Diaspora Studies program. He holds a PhD in history from the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. His research interests are Cuba, international political economy, race and racism, and Black Nova Scotian history, areas on which he regularly lectures and publishes. Professor Saney teaches and lectures. His teaching and lecturing have encompassed courses on Cuba, Caribbean political economy, law and human rights, and African Canadian history. He has published articles in several journals and magazines on these themes. He's the author of the highly acclaimed book, Cuba, A Revolution in Motion, which is being used in many universities across North America and the world. So we're standing by to speak with Professor Isaac Saney. As we said before, not much is being said now in the spaces about Venezuela, because we are distracted from that. But just recently, as you know, Venezuela was attacked. The president was kidnapped. Venezuela's oil has been cut off. Supplies to Havana, Cuba have been cut off. And just a few weeks ago, or a few days, if you will, the U.S. President Donald Trump called Cuba an unusual and extraordinary threat. Of course, Marco Rubio's stamp is all over that. An unusual and extraordinary threat to national security. That's U.S. national security. And he did threaten to this is serious, because this is a chokehold on Cuba. This is a blockade on Cuba. Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel has slammed the move. He says it's fascist, it's criminal, and it's genocidal. He has also said that the U.S. is willing to talk, that Cuba is willing to talk with the U.S., but without pressure or preconditions. And he has also warned that Cuba is close to failing, and he has announced forthcoming rationing plans to address the energy crisis. This is a blockade on Cuba that has been going on for a very long time, but something has changed, and we're going to be talking to our brother Isaac Cheney, Professor Saini. Professor Saini, thank you so much for joining us on the Africa Forum this morning.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, it's my pleasure.
Professor Saini, here in Jamaica, I am shocked that there is not much conversation going on about what's happening in Cuba. If we shout loud enough in Cuba, they can hear us. This is how close we are. And yet, there is a distancing, almost a cognitive dissonance about what's going on in Cuba. The U.S. blockade against Cuba has a history. And I want you to start for us by contextualizing, putting this in a historical context for us so our family, our listeners can understand where this is coming from, and then finally to go on to talk about what it means. But help us to understand the history of what's happening here.
Yeah. Well, I think specifically when we look at Cuba, I think there's another historical parallel with Haiti. And Cuba is sort of paying the same price for its defiance of the imperial order that Haiti played, in the sense of having a successful revolution, throwing off colonial, neo-imperial control, and then being punished for having done that. And so Cuba, for a very long period, if people are familiar with the history, will know that in the 19th century, they waged various wars for independence, culminating in 1898 when on the verge of victory, the United States intervened because it didn't want an independent Cuba to appear on its shores. It rather that it would be under its direct control. And so it intervened in Cuba militarily in 1898, and from 1898 to 1958, or the early of 1959, the United States treated Cuba as a neo-colony, as a protectorate. When the Cuban Revolution triumphed, with the goal of, in a sense, fulfilling the ambitions of the 19th century, establishing what one of the major, shall we, thinkers and activists, what some people often refer to as the author, if not the mentor, of Cuban independence, and if not the Cuban Revolution, Jose Marti, who was killed in 1895. But he believed in a Cuba completely independent, and also a Cuba that had a significant amount of social justice. In English, a Cuba with all and for all. And so when the revolution triumphed in 1959, one of its chief goals was to achieve independence and also achieve a society of social justice. The United States opposed this because they saw it as a threat to U.S. domination of the region, and particularly for what they saw as U.S. economic interest. And so when Cuba nationalized industries, which is legitimate under international law, it offered compensation as it was required to do to every single foreign investor. So Cuba came to agreements with investors in Spain, Canada, Britain, and so forth. But the United States deliberately decided not to do so in order to continue to create tensions. And so they then began to think of ways of punishing Cuba. One of these major ways was economically, cutting off trade from Cuba because Cuba had been integrated into the U.S. market, and then trying to punish other countries that traded with Cuba. There's a infamous memorandum from the U.S. State Department of April 6, 1960 by Lester Mallory, who was a very important person within the State Department, who wrote a memorandum in which it acknowledged, and it's available online. Just look, people can type in Google Mallory memorandum. And it acknowledged that the Cuban government had majority support. And the only way the United States could actually overthrow this government was to deprive it of all the things that the country would need, cutting off its trade and so forth. And in fact, this is almost a direct quote from it, saying, create hunger and desperation on the island. And for over 65 years, the United States has deepened this program, and it's reached its height under Donald Trump. In Trump's first presidency, he imposed over 240 extra measures, right? Mm-hmm. And particularly targeting Cuba's energy and fuel, right? And the goal is basically to reconvert Cuba into a U.S. colony. And it's cost Cuba billions upon billions of dollars, right? Mm-hmm. Every year, right? Mm-hmm. And I always like to point out, there's an argument that goes on that, well, Cuba's economic issues are a result of mismanagement of the Cuban government, and the problems of socialism. Now, I'd like to point out any government point to any government that hasn't made mistakes and so forth and errors. What happens with Cuba, and I want to make 2 points here. What happens is when Cuba makes a misstep in policy, it's exacerbated because of the U.S. extreme measures. So, for example, it cost Cuba more than 4 times before Trump's latest tariffs to import oil. And now the United States has imposed tariffs on any country that sends fuel to Cuba. And Cuba's electrical grid depends, as most countries, on the production of oil and so forth. And also it powers its hospitals and so forth. But another point I'd like to make as well is when we had the thaw under Obama, it happened, officially began on December 17th, 2014. For 2 years, we had this thaw. Cuba, formal diplomatic relations were restored between Cuba and the United States. And for 2 years, we had a lessening, not an end of the U.S. economic war in Cuba, which is what it was. We had a lessening of it. And the Cuban government remained in place, the same state, the same policies and so forth. But for those 2 years, with just a slight lessening of the economic war in Cuba, the Cuban economy flourished. And so that, to me, is an indication that the real cause of Cuba's problems, over 90% of it, is caused by the U.S. economic war in Cuba. But the war is aimed precisely, and they make this very, very clear. It is to reconvert Cuba into an appendage of the United States. And or at least try to negotiate better terms, right, especially from the global south, have always ended up destabilized, under siege. And this is, I think, Cuba represented the clear example of that. There's a famous sort of document that emerges from in the Kennedy administration in the early 60s, and which one of Kennedy's advisors, I think it was Schlesinger, wrote that Cuba provides, and I'm sort of paraphrasing here, the unhealthy example that a country, from the U.S. perspective, that a country could actually take control of its destiny, right? And it's written about that, right? And so Cuba represented a fundamental defiance. So I think this is what this is about. It's about punishing defiance, right? That you can be free somehow of U.S. dictate. But it also wants to demonstrate to the rest of the world, look what happens to you. This is the cost you'll pay. And also to demonstrate to people, particularly in the United States, when we think of what's unfolding in the United States, so I think we have to connect it to the domestic, the mass movements that have developed, right? Challenging the state, right? The fact that the word socialism, whatever people may think about it, the word socialism is no longer an anathema. It's no longer the, shall we say, the boogie word, right? Or the jumbie word, as we would say, in the United States, right? It's no longer that, right? People are thinking about alternatives to the economic system. And Cuba is an example of at least in people's minds, of socialism. So they can demonstrate that alternatives to the existing economic and social system that exists predominantly in the rest of the world, is imperial capitalism, if I use that term, will always fail. Okay, Cuba is now shown as an example of that. But Cuba is resisting, right? The Cubans have always been incredibly resilient. They're resisting. One of the things they can do with their system is they can attempt to spread the pain of what's happening and to equally to ration the limited goods that they have. So, for example, electricity and obviously and energy is one of their major Achilles heels. So one of the things they're doing is distributing the blackouts, what they call apagodes, across the island, so everybody has at least some electricity. And to distribute the limited goods that they have, right?
All right, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm going to come back to the resistance. Can you hold for me? Let me take a break, and we'll come back to how Cuba is resistant, and also to look at what we can do, because it seems as if we have just folded our arms. But hang on for me. PhD in history from the School of Oriental African Studies, University of London. He joins me on the phone lines. His research interests, of course, Cuba, international political economy, race and racism. And we told you about others, and we continue to do that throughout the morning, throughout the interview. Professor Saini, just before we went to the break, and my apologies, it was kind of a long one, but thank you so much for staying with us. You talked about the resistance and how Cuba is resisting. Before we go back to that, give us an idea of, as far as you know, of what's happening on the ground, how this blockade is impacting Cuba, because this blockade, there's a U.S. blockade, as if you have pointed out, on Cuba for many, many, many decades. And you also said, so they've taken it now to another level. How is this level impacting things on the ground for Cuba? And then let's talk about the resistance.
Yeah. Well, the economic war that the United States is waging in Cuba is having a significant impact. In terms of energy, the lack of oil, Cuba is now having extended blackouts in right across the country. I'm talking to friends in Cuba, people I work with, enduring things like 17 hours of blackouts. So you can imagine how this impacts on the island in terms of specifically, people trying to make sure that they keep their food fresh, obviously because of what happens with refrigerators and so forth. Transport has, basically in many cases now ground to standstill in some areas. We worry about hospitals if people are on dialysis and so forth. So it's having an all-round effect because it's oil that makes energy, and we know how dependent we are on fuel for transportation and electricity across the world. Then there's the issue of the attack on tourism. Cuba has few natural resources, and tourism was one of the things they turned to in order specifically to generate foreign exchange, to buy the things they need, they import food and so forth. So some of these tourist resorts, right, are suffering from a lack of electricity, but it's important to understand that you have other tourist resorts, like, for example, Varadero, a major one, in which their electricity is provided by natural gas, Cuban natural gas. So they're doing okay and so forth. So these aspects, but it's the impact on the population as a whole. That's why it's collective population, right? It's really, in a sense, creating the chance where, for example, food grown on the farms in the rural areas won't be able to make it into the cities precisely because of a lack of fuel transportation. Garbage trucks obviously can't travel around to pick up the garbage, so garbage begins to accumulate. But how that has an impact on people's health is obvious, how it has an impact on people's morale, right? Yeah. So that's what specifically is happening in all of these aspects. The ability to import medicines, right? Cuba has a lauded healthcare system, not just in terms of the global south, but internationally, right? This will cost lives and so on. So it's all sided in terms of what the United States seeks to impose on Cuba. And I'd like to make a point as well that, all of these sanctions the United States uses and imposes in other countries is sort of monitored through what's called the Office of Foreign Asset Control. It's a special office in the United States government to do this, right? And more people are assigned, and this is to actually monitor and persecute and every single transaction that Cuba does than, for example, the so-called U.S. fight against terrorism and so forth. They're so determined, they're so obsessed, right, with punishing Cuba for merely asserting its right to self-determination, the right to control its own destiny, that they're willing to expand inordinate amounts of resources to make sure Cuba can trade with the rest of the world. And what Trump has done, as we pointed out, is Trump has made it very overt, very clear. He's not only said, I will tariff any country that sends oil to Cuba, which is an attempt to starve Cuba of oil, but at the end of the day as well, he's also threatened a naval blockade. They're determined, and they themselves have generated this idea of Cuba as a failed state, that Cuba's going to collapse soon and so forth. And of course, it's sort of ironic when you see how many millions of people in the United States don't have health care, and others have been deprived of the limited health care that they have in the United States. They call Cuba a failed state. It's ridiculous.
It's very interesting because, and we talk about the resilience and the years of blockade. Russia has been under sanctions for years and years and years, obviously a different situation. But then we see the resilience coming out of that. And to what extent do you think Russia, and I want to go back to the resistance, and I do, Russia and China, considering the Donroe Doctrine, do you see Russia and or China coming to Cuba's defense? Mexico has been talking, but nothing has been done. Jamaica has turned back a ship, I think a ship called the Emily. The research from our colleague Roger Hasfall is brilliant on this, of a ship that came in and that was turned back because it didn't hit Jamaica. It hit Jamaica a few minutes before the announcement of the tariffs. So Jamaica has washed its hand, it appears, of Cuba. The CARICOM is silent. And so that you wonder who is going to make a move on this, who is going to break this blockade and go to Cuba's aid. Do you see Russia and China probably doing that? and or?
Well, Russia has made very strong diplomatic statements, and they've sent aid, right? We don't know, and the Cuban president in his latest press conference said there's things he can't talk about, right? China has also sent Cuba significant financial aid and support to upgrade its electrical system to repair it, because one of the things with the U.S. economic war against Cuba is not only can Cuba not get fuel, it's very difficult for them to get fuel, and now they're trying to make it almost impossible for them to get fuel. It's also you can't import parts to repair it, because the U.S. will sanction countries that engage in trading with Cuba. So China's provided a significant amount of support in terms of upgrading the electrical grid, as well as providing over 60,000 tons of rice to Cuba. Vietnam has stepped forward. Other countries are coming forward, not only diplomatically, but also in concrete ways. But obviously, one of the things is that sometimes, the Cubans can't say exactly what other countries are doing, because this then opens up these countries to persecution, opens up these things to U.S. sabotage, right? As well, right? So countries are speaking out. Claudia Sheinbaum, who's a president of Mexico, has basically come out and said, in fact, there's supposed to be a ship going to Cuba either today or tomorrow, right? Okay, with humanitarian aid. And she's committed to finding ways to send oil to Cuba. Russia said it will send oil to Cuba as well, right? So the international community, in a sense, has come out with a tremendous chorus, right? Condemning this economic blockade. But, we've made point, some of us were writing that there's a time to go beyond rhetoric. We need concrete action. We need people to defy the economic war and so forth. Yes. Now, when it comes to CARICOM and it comes to, Jamaica or what have you, okay, in particular, because I remember this story, we were all stunned and very upset that I think it was a tanker coming in for liquid natural gas, because that's how Cubans cook, right? Yes. And, that the tanker was turned back and so forth. It upset a lot of people, but it's what CARICOM is doing. And as someone, who grew up in Trinidad and Tobago, who believes so much in Caribbean unity, it really upsets me as well as other people as well. And of course, CARICOM is, shall we say, caving into the pressure of the great imperial giant, right? Okay, that has threatened them and so forth. But, I sort of think of what Cuba has done for the Caribbean, the doctors it's trained, the support it's provided, right? And in terms of Jamaica, even help in trying to assist them with imposing sustainable ways of energy, like the replacement of the light bulbs, remember correctly, and so forth. So as the great Norman Govan, and who was a son of Jamaica, Norman Govan, and who was a good friend of mine, said, he said that the world owes Cuba unpayable debt. It's unpayable because of what Cuba's done in terms of its doctors, what Cuba did in supporting national liberation struggles and so forth, what Cuba's done, particularly in the Caribbean, of training so many students right across the Caribbean and so forth. And the CARICOM needs to rise to the occasion, right? It needs to rise precisely because are we going to simply be vassals of the United States with no independence? Are we going to betray the long history of independence struggles that the Caribbean has, particularly the legacy of the numerous revolts against enslavement and so forth, right? There's that historical debt that we owe, right? And, CARICOM has been very disappointing. People have been quiet, and I think it's because the United States has threatened them and so forth. But I think when it comes to CARICOM as well, as Hurricane Melissa and other hurricanes have demonstrated, we are so vulnerable to climate change, right? And Cuba actually is one of the most innovative countries in trying, as an island nation, to wrestle with climate change. They have a plan until 2100. In English, it's called Cuba's Life Task. Okay, there's a very good documentary about this online. Just people can type it in, called Cuba's Life Task. It's done by Helen Yaffe, a friend of mine, a colleague who's an exceptional student of Cuba. She teaches at the University of Glasgow, and they produces a documentary called Cuba's Life Task. And it sort of documents, in the hour or so, what Cuba's attempting to do to 2100 to wrestle with climate change, right? As an example, right? And so I think, if we were to allow the United States to crush Cuba, it will have significant impacts on Caribbean independence. It will have significant impacts, more importantly, on the future, because there are things that Cuba has taught us. How can a small country with limited resources provide healthcare to everybody? How can they provide universal healthcare? How can they create a country that remains one of the safest in the region, right? How can they create a country that really looks to the future and is able to plan, to 2100, for example, right? 2 or 3 or 4 generations in the future to deal with this gargantuan gargantuan task that we face called climate change, right? So, the United States is trying to snuff this all out as well, this example. And, but as I said before, the international community has condemned it. I think there's some concrete aid coming towards Cuba, but obviously the Cubans can't talk about it because the U.S. will try and sabotage that. But also on the ground, outside...
the U.S. has an armada in the Caribbean waters just the same. So that is also another issue to consider. Boats are being blown up. Yes.
Yeah. So it's a threat. I mean, this is like, when you return to the Monroe Doctrine, the people also talk about Teddy Roosevelt. He used to talk about, talk softly and carry a big stick. So Donald Trump speaks extremely crudely and loudly and is willing to beat people over the head with this big stick, right? Yes. And so I understand, it's the whole point. I understand the pressures CARICOM governments are under, right? One, will there be an invasion, right? And the U.S. has already shown through Venezuela they're willing to do that, right? And impose all sorts of costs. Yes. Then, of course, there's the fear that so many family members have so many Caribbean members of all these various Caribbean islands have family members in the United States. Will they be cut off if they can't get visas, right? Will they be able to see their children, their grandchildren, and so forth? So the U.S. is very malignly and maliciously using these interconnections, right, to put pressure on its governments. And Caribbean islands have always been vulnerable, which is why I've argued in a piece, just before the attack on Venezuela, which happened, where I argued that obviously our unity is what gives us our strength, right? And I still hope that a vision of a united Caribbean will continue to hold people's visions, right? Will continue to hold people's imaginations into the future, right? But the United States is threatening the entire world, and that's the terror of it all, right? And so people have to stand up. But countries like China, the United States, even Canada, for example. So I live in Canada, in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and even Canadians are feeling threatened because he's repeatedly talked about the 51st state, and the latest overtures by the Canadian Prime Minister to China were criticized by Trump, and Trump at one point, apparently somebody in his administration tweeted that they will never allow China to take over Canada and so forth. So Canadians themselves have actually become very upset and now see that defending the sovereignty of Cuba, the independence of Cuba, the self-determination of Cuba is in a sense defending Canadian independence and sovereignty. There's actually a parliamentary petition in Canada. So a parliamentary petition is different than an ordinary petition. It's actually a petition that has to be sponsored by a member of parliament. Okay, and it's a petition calling on Canada to defend, Latin American Caribbean solidarity, but particularly to increase its economic ties and material assistance to Cuba. And so once that receives a certain number, and the petition already surpassed the number of signatures, the Canadian government must officially respond to it. That's gathered significant support. So I think in a sense what we're seeing internationally, both from the level of governments, is at least diplomatically very strong condemnation of what's happening to Cuba, but some governments, I think, are going to rise to the occasion, or at least say they're going to rise to the occasion, and we don't know what's going on behind the scenes because this stuff can't be spoken about in public. And on the ground, ordinary folks are organizing, right?
Well, and I suppose this is critical as we to talk about how we organize on the ground, grassroots, how we march on embassies, how we pressure governments, how we pressure members of parliament to say pay attention. Let me take a quick break. I come back because we still want to talk about how the resistance. I really want to get there in the next verse, and then to say also, how do we, the ordinary person, we, the individual on the ground with the people power, begin to pressure our governments to pay attention to what's happening in Cuba as America, the U.S. president plans to burn it down to the ground to build it up into what he wants to. Let me go to a break. Happening to our nearest neighbor. A lot of us are related to Cubans. A lot of us have grandfathers, grandmothers. Nana Rita Marley was born in Cuba, and we can talk to our relatives next door, and each one of us can say, my grandfather was from Cuba. My grandmother was from Cuba. This is the kind of situation that we have here on the island, Professor Cheney. We are all, we are all related, not just by proximity, but blood related to Cuba. But we are distracted, a divergent gaze, I think, and we're helping to bring awareness this morning to the conditions of the situation. At the same time, we're saying, Cuban people have been going through this for a while, and they have decided that they are fighting back. They're not going to sit down and take this. We heard from the president. He said America's and Donald Trump's behavior is fascist. It is criminal. It is genocidal. And he has also said that he's bringing Cuba close to failing, using his words. And you've described to us just now the extent of the situation on the ground from what you're hearing. Talk to us now about that resilience that you mentioned earlier. What is Cuba doing, and what are the Cuban people? How are they dealing with this situation?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd like to point out there's also a Jamaican-Cuban society in Cuba itself, right?
Yes.
So people that actually celebrate and commemorate and study these links, right? And so in a sense, we're all part of one Caribbean nation, right? And what happens to one happens to all of us. We may not see the immediate impact, right? But this is necessarily going to ripple down, right? What Cuba is doing is, it's always been incredibly resilient. It's a society suffused with an ethos of social solidarity at all levels, from neighborhoods going all the way up to the state. And so what we've seen is that, Cuba has a long history of living with this economic war, okay, and finding ways to survive, right, and to continue to resist. So what's happened is obviously the government has instituted a number of measures, right, to ensure an equitable distribution of goods, and at the same time to ensure, as I said, particularly with the electrical situation that electricity is rationed. In terms of electricity, they've also embarked on a very ambitious, right, program to actually generate as much electricity as possible through renewable resources. So they're opening up solar energy parks, photovoltaic parks that generate energy through sunshine. Maybe close to 10%, just over 10% of Cuba's electricity is now generated by solar energy. They're trying to accelerate that as well. And so there's a lot of stuff that Cuba's attempting to do. But at the end of the day, that takes time, that takes resources, and oil is going to be the primary source of their generation of electricity, right? So there's one thing what's going on in the society to ensure that, one, we can equitably deal with this, and they can protect the vulnerable, right? The other point as well is that what's happened is that Trump's overt and very clear attacks on Cuba, attempt to destroy the Cuban Revolution and carry on this collective punishment, has ignited in Cubans and shall we say, invigorated the anti-imperialist spirit, right? They've been under this grind for over 65 years, and particularly in the last few years when Trump really accelerated the war on them, right? Made it truly hyper aggressive. But it's ignited this. So just recently, Cuba has an annual march that's been going on for 73 years to honor the birth of Jose Marti, Cuba's national hero. And thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands have participated in that, right? People on social media and elsewhere rededicating their commitment to the Cuban Revolution and so forth. Because Cuba has a deep history of resisting imperial control and rebelling against it. Cuba's history is replete with that, right? With the Cuban Revolution perhaps representing the apex of that resistance as well. And Cuba is also engaged, and they have a very able, very competent, perhaps the most able and competent, given the limited resources they operate on, diplomatic corps. And so Cuba's foreign minister, Bruno Rodriguez Parilla, is traveling in the Far East and to other countries, right? And showing up the support of these countries for Cuba, and I'm sure negotiating hopefully what will be concrete deals and so forth. So the resistance is there. There's this long anti-imperial tradition, right?
Yes.
Okay. And Cuba is also pointing out, and they've made this very clear, this is not just about Cuba. This is about the struggle for the region's independence as well, and for global independence, right? If the United States is able to succeed in crushing the Cuban Revolution, the consequences will be incalculable, right? For the region, not only in terms of independence and self-determination, but the idea of actually carrying on development, right? Development in which that serves the people as opposed to serving the billionaire oligarchy that runs the United States and so forth. So there's a lot of stuff going on inside Cuba. They've released plans and so forth. And also they continue, to digitalized. There's a hospital that was digitized and so forth, and all of these, and a whole number of other things to carry the country forward. But the goal now is focused on survival. And in fact, as the Cuban president said, every day that the Cuban Revolution survives is a victory, because it's facing the most powerful military and economic power that's ever existed in human history. And then the other point to bear in mind too is when people have done polls of the United States, right? Okay, the United States citizens, the vast majority oppose a military intervention in Cuba and also oppose the economic war against Cuba. They would like the normalization of relations. And of course, everybody's been speaking about in terms of U.S. domestic politics, what will happen in the U.S. midterms, right? And we see a number of by-elections that the Republicans would normally win, that Trump carried by, double digits, right, in the last presidential election, right? Okay, just happened recently, right? We see Democrats winning this, right? Now, the Democrats, some of them have spoken out, some of them haven't spoken out, right? Because the war on Cuba has always been a bipartisan policy in the United States. But we see a growing sentiment in the United States among the citizens against the kind of economic and political system they have that's generating mass immiseration, impoverishment, and tremendous levels of inequality, who are now connecting it that the U.S. foreign policy abroad is which is so hyper aggressive and imperialist, also brings costs to them at home, because how else are they going to finance? Trump is talking about a $1.5 trillion U.S. military budget. The only way they can finance that is by gutting all of the social programs, gutting the rights of workers and so forth, by lowering wages and so on. So people are drawing these interconnections. So the resistance for Cuba, obviously on the island, right? The people are resilient. Obviously the goal of the United States is to wear them down. It's to generate, as Mallory said, in that infamous April 6, 1960 memorandum, which has really been sort of the model, the framework, right? Laid out the architecture of this economic war to generate hunger and desperation, right? But the Cubans are resisting, right? And I think some members of the international community are coming to the, shall we say, to their aid, right? That's of course to be seen. As I said before, they can't talk about this openly because the United States will intervene to stop these measures.
Hold one sec for me, please. Cuba. Of course, it's an urgent situation, and we have, I think, a responsibility and to honor Cuba. As we speak, there are Cuban doctors in our hospitals, Cuban nurses in our hospitals all across Jamaica. Professor Cheney, there is this school of thought, and so many persons have been talking about this, that as long as Marco Rubio is Secretary of State, that the U.S. will take this to the nth degree, as we saw, even to the point of what happened in Venezuela, but that the difference might be that they will not keep or want to keep a socialist government in place. What's your thinking on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the goal is simply, to basically overthrow the entire Cuban government and its state system, to reimpose dependent capitalism dominated by the United States. And Marco Rubio, Trump has said that he'd be a great president of Cuba, right? I mean, he's obviously going to be deeply unpopular. But of course, people talk about the fact that, there's a whole debate by many people, what drives the U.S. war against Cuba? Is it this rabid anti-Cuba Miami crowd with people like Marco Rubio and so forth? Rubio himself, liked to portray himself as a victim of, the Castro government, right? But it turned out his parents actually had left Cuba during the Fulgencio Batista dictatorship, which was supported by the United States. So he's created all sorts of myths and fallacious things about his past. The point is, at the end of the day, there seems to be a coincidence here of people like Marco Rubio with long-term interests of the United States, right? The U.S., it was during the Obama administration, right? Even as they had this rapprochement in Cuba, that they talked about a pivot to Asia, and it was under Biden that Blinken, who was then the Secretary of State, said the struggle against China, because China has emerged as the chief economic rival and competitor to the United States, right? That the front line of struggle against China was in Latin America because of so much Chinese investment, right? And so I think this is part and parcel of a coincidence of the rabid nature of the anti-Cuban exile community in Miami, and people like Marco Rubio who have delusions of grandeur about what their role would be in a future world. And he, obviously, given his previous criticisms of Trump when he was running against him and so forth, he's willing to accommodate himself to Trump in order to achieve this. And so people often think of Trump as being the bull in the China shop, that Rubio is pulling with a ring through his nose, controlling him and so forth. But, the U.S. long-term interests, and war against Cuba predated the influence of the anti-Cuba mafia, right, that exists, right, and so on. But it's clear that personality does play a role in all of this. Trump is a malignant narcissist, right, okay, who has no concept of empathy. And Marco Rubio is an ideologue who's committed, right, to destroying the Cuban Revolution, destroying the Cuban socialist system, and returning Cuba to the selfish private interests that controlled it before and so forth. Now, the issue is this: we, in the first Trump regime, when people thought that Steve Bannon, or was saying that Steve Bannon and Steve Bannon was controlling Trump's domestic policy and John Bolton was controlling his foreign policy, Trump, as the malignant narcissist that he was, didn't like that and got rid of them, right? Yes. And so some people have wondered if he, because Trump, he doesn't want to, he's thinking about the midterm elections. He also, in many levels, doesn't want to have themselves engaged in something messy. He likes things done very quickly, right? And so what he thinks of himself as the master of the art of the deal. And, and he may, in a sense, find that Rubio's policy, if Cuba doesn't collapse, and I don't think it will collapse, I think it will survive, right? And it will resist. He may himself become tired of this particular policy and tired of Rubio, but that's to be said. At the end of the day, at the end of the day, the U.S. enmity to Cuba, because of what Cuba represents, it will still exist simply because Cuba represents this defiance, this independence, and this alternative social system, right? But, it's, the kind of, the fact that Trump is sort of like a symptom, both an accelerant, and we have this sort of merging of this malignant, psychopathic, narcissistic personality with the U.S. state is sort of a mark of the times, right? It's a mark of the decay that we're seeing in the world. And, the last point I'd make is these individuals, as the fulcrum of world politics, shift from the West to the East, right? And as continents such as Africa, which is the youngest continent in the world, are obviously going to be asserting themselves in the latter part of the 21st century. These individuals are committed to ensuring that the West remains dominant, even if they have to burn the world down to stop it.
While the Armada is in the Caribbean waters, there's also a bigger one of Iran, and one would think that their attention would be focused elsewhere, diverted, if you will. Do you see within that context? Do you envision any immediacy in terms of how and what the U.S. might do militarily in Cuba, if anything?
Yeah, well, that's a question too. Will the U.S. attack Cuba? I mean, as you mentioned, the threats to Iran, right? And a war with Iran will have, God, who knows what consequences it will have, what damage it will do to the world economy, what kind of broader, not only regional, but global conflict it will unleash, right? Because there's always the law of unintended consequences. Will the United States use that as a pretext if they attack Iran and all sorts of chaos emerges to attack Cuba? And they know that Cuba's a different nut to crack. Stuff is coming out now that when they seized Maduro, kidnapped him, and so what launched this attack on Venezuela, the original portrayal of it was that it was a seamless, seamless act, or seamless intervention that proceeded with no casualties. We're now discovering it wasn't as seamless as before, right? Okay, and that in fact, the Cubans who died, there was 32 Cubans who were killed, and the others who provide sort of a bodyguard. They've been there, everybody knew they were there providing advice, as the United States has military advisors elsewhere. They fought ferociously, and so they know that Cuba's a different nut to crack. They know that Cuba has history. In fact, as some of your listeners may know, Cuba played a very significant role, the armed forces, in defeating the racist system of the South African state. I mean, defeating the racist South African apartheid armed forces in the 80s, right? So Cuba's a different nut to crack, and it could project it could lead to, significant U.S. losses, right? It would be a protracted war, right? Also, one of the things that, they have to be concerned about too, is that, yes, people, and some that because of the heightened economic war that the United States began waging on Cuba, particularly during the first Trump administration, continued by the Biden administration in the midst of COVID and so forth, and now heightened again to unknown levels in the second Trump administration, is we've had, Cubans have left Cuba, and they've left primarily for economic reasons, not because they're rejecting the Cuban economic system, but because they're under economic duress, right? Or do they want to provoke a humanitarian crisis in Cuba if they were to intervene? What would be the consequences to the United States? And all of these different things sort of rise to our mind and so forth. But Cuba will resist. Cuba has a history of resisting, and the United States knows. And all these articles appearing in the U.S. media, knowing that Cuba will be a very difficult nut for Cuba, for the United States to crack, simply because they know that the Cubans have a doctrine of war of the entire people, okay, which is everybody is prepared to resist. And, at the end of the day, is the U.S. prepared to pay that price? They like to have easy victories, right? Okay, they like to have easy victories, and I don't think they'll have an easy victory with Cuba, and the Cubans will give it. Yeah, so these are all of these things, and it's unpredictable. I know it's vague. What will the United States do? Who would have thought? I've talked to a lot of my friends that we would see such astonishing developments in such a short period of time. They're calling to annex Canada. They're calling to annex Greenland, right? Okay, what happened with Venezuela? This huge armada that went in and was put in the southern Caribbean seas, Maduro. The fact that a significant portion of it continues to be parked in the northern Caribbean, right? The aggressions against Iran and so forth. And we witnessed an open genocide in Gaza, and we also have one unfolding in Sudan and the Congo that nobody talks about, right? The tearing apart of international law, right? The fact that might makes right is now openly extolled as the principle of international law, right? Or that there's no international law, there's only might makes right. These things have happened so quickly that it's really, stunned a lot of people, frightened all of us, right? But it generates the unpredictability of the world in relations. And the last point I'd like to make as well is, we tend to think of the United States as this overweening military power, and it is, right? With all, it's tentacles everywhere, but it's not invincible, right? And in fact, we can see, when, this last measures of Trump against Cuba as a sign of weakness, that the policy has failed, right? So they decided they have to up the ante, right? And then Trump calling for negotiations. He's also said we should talk with him, and he said, we were talking with them and so forth. These alternatives specious. And the Cubans have always said, as they've always said Trump the revolution, they're open for discussions. They're open for dialogue, right? As equals, right? Okay. And that in a sense, as long, Cuba preserves its right to self-determination and sovereignty, right? So the fact that, Trump has talked about these things, right? And, that we need to talk with Cuba, Cuba needs to strike a deal, is in a sense a sign of that, maybe not of weakness, if people don't see it as a sign of U.S. imperialist weakness, a sign that the U.S. imperialism cannot always get, despite its incredible technological superiority, its military preponderance, its economic might, it can't always get its own way, right? And so forth. And the Cubans have resisted. Yeah.
We are going to leave it there. Thank you so much, Professor Isaac Aseni. You have really helped us to understand the issues in Cuba, and also, I think, really lit a fire under us that we have to do much more here in Jamaica on the ground. I think as individuals, what we do, we'll see that tomorrow, I'm quite sure. Thank you so much again, and we'll keep in touch with you on this.
Yeah, thank you, and I encourage Jamaicans to pressure the government and to participate in all the activities in support of Cuba.
Thank you so much, my brother. Our brother there, Professor Isaac Aseni, and he's a professor of Black Studies and Cuba specialist and coordinator of the Black and African Diaspora Studies program at Dalhousie University. Holds a PhD in history from the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. His research interests are Cuba, international political economy, race and racism, etc. And we're going to be talking about Cuba later on this morning, again around closer to 8:35 hour. But in between that, we are going to be talking to Pan-African Attorney at Law, Bert Samuels, after the break, because there is a situation that we have to pay attention to here in Jamaica. We cannot ignore it. it is going to burst out big and nasty and dirty. We cannot ignore that there was a scientific research done in Jamaica on Jamaican children and also on elite athletes, and that it was funded to a large extent by Jeffrey Epstein. And my own research, and I'm telling you about some serious lack of sleep research, has shown me that Jeffrey Epstein has got an invitation to come to Jamaica to see the research in motion, and that he did accept the invitation. And I have, through the FBI files, documentary information, that he did come more than once. All of that in the FBI files. A quick break. All right, going to the phone lines where Pan-African attorney at law, Bert Samuels, is standing by. Bert, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us, Bert, at this hour.
Morning, my sister. Morning to your listeners all over the world.
I'm going to play just maybe a minute. This is 13 minutes long, but I'll just play a minute of this TED Talk given by a researcher in Jamaica. The research was conducted on elite athletes and students here in Jamaica, partially funded by Jeffrey Epstein. All right, trying to get that, but it's not coming, so let's do this again.
Wheel and come again.
Yes, I'm getting it up as best as I can. All right, looks like we might have a little difficulty with it, but I'll play it, I think, after the interview or in the break. We'll set it and come again. So what we have, let me just go quickly to this. And let me say also that I invited this morning Bruce James from MVP to be part of this discussion. And he says that he told my broadcast assistant, Vivian, that he doesn't do interviews on Sundays.
Okay.
So he's not here, but he was invited to participate. All right, so let me just quickly go through what we have, what we know. Documents indicate, and these are documents that I've seen, that Jeffrey Epstein partially, to a large extent actually, funded an academic research project linked to a proposed Jamaican visit by Epstein in Jamaica. We're not saying that funding is a crime. We're not saying funding is an accusation. And we are not accusing anybody of anything. But funding does create influence and access. The research, knee symmetry, was done from 1996 over a period of decades. It started in 1996, and my own research tells me that I'm not sure if it is finished yet. Quite a few papers have been published. It also included elite athletes, and the elite athletes have been named Usain Bolt, Shelley Fraser Price, Elaine Thompson, Asafa Powell, Nesta Carter, Johan Blake. I'm not quite sure if I'm leaving out anyone. The funding, of course, is newsworthy, so we're asking these questions. How was the research funded? Through which institutional channels? What oversight and ethics approvals applied, and what safeguards and documented were enforced? Now, my thing on this is, because my research has shown me that Epstein himself was informed every step of the way. I mean, almost it looks like a weekly basis on what was happening with this research. And because he was invited to Jamaica, and he said that he would come, and my research has also found that he did come more than once. We have a check that the money is paid to the civil aviation, but we have more than that. We have the FBI and the CIA doing a proper investigation And all of the documented flight details are involved in those documents that are in the FBI files. And they show Epstein coming into Jamaica at least 7 times over that period. As an attorney, what... And last week you sent us information, and I read it on air, to say that you have a concern, and there are certain issues that you would raise. What are some of these issues as an attorney that are red flag issues to you, and what would you raise?
Well, first, Cabo, I want to thank you for breaking the news. My mouth was jaw-dropped last week, Sunday, when you started to talk. Thank you for that. I couldn't discuss without thanking you for opening that door for the Jamaican people across Jamaica.
Thank you.
You see, 2 African people have said, if I knew then what I know now, would have behaved differently. And it is a re-enslavement of us when we open our doors, as we did in West Africa, because, we were very inviting and kind to visitors from other ethnicities, and that history that we can't allow that history to be repeated. I mean, Cabo and I, we are guided by Garvey that, we cannot allow history not to open our eyes. And this is very concerning to me, that what we now know about Esteem and his plan and his gang, what they were interested in. Now that we know, I think there should be a commission of inquiry into what interference with our people took place during these studies. Because they have the blood of Bolt, they have the blood of Asafa, and we hear that genetic engineering is something that they are now going to use those samples. So we want to know, where is the blood of Asafa, the blood of Bolt, and those people. We want to track down those, because they have a proprietary interest. Jamaica and the individual athletes have a proprietary interest in what has become of their body fluids. That's the first thing. So this commission of inquiry, I think that we need for people to just speak the truth about what happened. You said that funding, gives you access, and that's frightening. The access to Africa has led us to be over here. That's why we are here. That's how we reached Jamaica, because we gave open doors and access. And I'm not saying that's far-fetched. You and I see a connection between our history and our present. I am maybe too emotional about this, but there's always a connection between my history and my present.
Yes.
And this is not something to be glossed over. We must get a commission of inquiry where we have experts from Jamaica and those who are helping to open the Pandora box that is marked Big Esteem on it. Yes. We need an investigation.
And there's so much information out there, Bert. Granted, the investigation in terms of looking at the documents, the 3 million pages dumped by the DOJ, that you have to go many places, and you really do have to do a cross-reference and triangulation. And imagine my shock when I discovered, first of all, of a check that suggested that a private plane, this was found in Epstein's documents, that a private plane landed around the time that he said he would come into Jamaica. I left that for a while, but imagine my shock when I did a cross-reference and found tucked away in the FBI files, and this is an active investigation all the way up to 2023, that tucked away in those files are records of Jeffrey Epstein coming into Jamaica more than once, landing in Montego Bay. The question is, where did he go? And who did he meet with? And this is why, as an
were there any underage girls on his aircraft?
That's another thing. That's another question. I mean,
were there any local underage girls found for him?
And this was discussed, and we're not saying underage in this case, but in one of the emails we had that discussion where someone said, assuming he was in Jamaica already, said, well, I am at this hotel. We have a name of a hotel, I won't call it. I am at this hotel in Kingston, and I am here with 2 long-legged beauties from Hungary or Bulgaria, and we can find 2. Let me know if you want 2 also, something to that effect, and that I am licensed to carry. The email is out there. And so that was an email conversation between Jeffrey Epstein and someone who was expecting him to come and view the the research in process, and this was happening at the University of the West Indies and UTech with elite athletes, 100 elite athletes. So we're not saying that the funding is wrongdoing. We are not saying that the elite athletes even knew what was happening. But what was the process?
What we know now. I mean, persons are being dragged before their parliament to testify.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Persons are being dragged before their lawmakers to testify. We need an investigation in this at the highest level.
The question,
persons should be subpoenaed.
Why do you think, Bert, that there has been, and I told you I invited to this discussion because research material has been published, and in one of the research papers, it was co-authored by Bruce James, and this is why I invited Bruce James to come and tell us here in this, inform us, educate us, if you will, on what he knew and what was the process like. We don't want to put children or schools or parishes out in the public now without, and we have to be very careful how we do this. And this is why I really appreciate the point and the call you're making for an investigation. What would this investigation look like? Are you saying a commission of inquiry? And what would be the questions raised in that? What question would that be around?
Well, I would want some of those children are now adults, right? So we would want them to be called to say what was done with them, what papers they're signed, if their parents gave authority in writing for them to be examined and tested, all of that. And then we want to track down the blood. We want to track down the blood of
and
our
all body fluids, whether it is
and all body fluids,
swab of the cheek. Because in one of the emails, Jeffrey Epstein was told, "I can get a swab of the cheek from Jamaican athletes." It's easier to do this research on the island of Jamaica because Jamaica's laws are more relaxed than the laws of the United States.
Yeah, and we have a culture of welcoming other ethnicities with a big smile. That's the tourist logo that we use. Remember, I don't know if you remember this. When Bolt was doing all that he was doing, he was attacked. Firstly, for too much gymnastics on the track. Yes. And then they wanted to say that his limbs were so long that he was unfair competition. Yes. And he shouldn't be allowed to compete because of his African stature of height that we came over here on with and our resistance. They went after Bolt in a personal way.
Yes.
Until the Olympic authorities found that he was a big attraction for crowds and they backed off. So he has been attacked from several ways, but this is bio attack on our athletes. They want to know why we run so fast. Right? They want to know why we run so fast. They weren't down here 200 years ago where we had to escape by running. So our history is passionate when it comes to our athletic prowess. It's part of our survival. And they want to clone us. They want to clone someone from another race
and this is what
they can go to the Olympics in 30 years' time and they begin to beat us when we don't know that it is us running rather than them.
And what's interesting about that is that these things were discussed in the emails. Eugenics discussed in the emails. In one of the emails, one of the researchers said, we're looking for elite human samples. Jeffrey Epstein talked a lot and had many, many conferences with top scientists, evolutionary biologists, eugenicists, you name it, physicists and so on, about creating that elite human being. And one of the things that he said he was going to do with that was to also use his own sperm to create this elite human being using children as young as 8 and 9 years old, and as soon as they can reproduce, using their wombs as incubators for these elite human beings. All of that is in the emails, and this is why I'm very concerned that the Jamaican authorities, knowing this, because I know they know, have stuck their heads in the sand and have their butts exposed on something that is about to blow wide open. What happened in Jamaica?
We want to track down the 30 pieces of silver that may have passed to cause our young people to have this cloning of themselves, it is very serious.
Yes.
It's not the first time they have interfered with the black body.
Yes.
They are envy. You know, the envy of the black body is another chapter in our history.
Yes.
You know that.
Yes.
You know,
I know
our
that.
strength and
all
other
the time.
things is a huge problem for certain ethnicities. And they're talking about elite athletes. If they saw us as genuinely elite, would they have treated us that way historically?
This is
we are elite.
Yeah, and once again, as an attorney, I hear you, Bert. The call you're making, just to underscore this call you're making, hearing the research, knowing what you know. Reiterate for us the call you're making.
Yeah. You see, you know, when I was about 25, I went to the U.S. and I was seeking a job, and I got a job as a laborer. And the white guy looked at me, interviewed me, and he says, you have broad shoulders. You'd be a good worker here. Mm-hmm. So the black body has always been sought to be exploited. You know, this is not strange. It has always happened. Yes. So that this commission of inquiry would have our local biologists, it would have the power to subpoena whoever we think should be subpoenaed, and they should give evidence on oath with repercussions if they lie to the Jamaican people.
And who should be assembling this commission of inquiry? Whose responsibility is it to do that?
Ministry would be the Ministry of Culture and Sports. I think that should be where it happened from a governmental point of view.
And education. And education.
Yeah, and education.
Because this research also took place in primary schools across Jamaica, with children starting from 8 years old.
Yeah. You notice when we were training and when we have our local athletic competition, do you see how many foreigners have descended on us?
Of course.
And we were there and we thought it was a glory for us to be so admired. Now we realize that the admiration was not, we should not have opened the door so wide for them.
No, there are questions to be answered here, Bert, and I really appreciate your knowledge as an attorney.
Last point, Kheru, last point is, you remember when our athletes thought that we could only succeed if we went to foreign colleges?
I do remember.
And trained there.
Yes.
So we also need to investigate what may have happened to our athletes when they left our shores. The fact that we are now training our own athletes who become world runners, that's why they are now coming here.
Lots of questions to be asked. So too am I.
Lots of questions.
I'm going to keep on this. As I said before, I have all the documented information regarding Epstein's visits to Jamaica, and that I can turn over because I've already done the research, but it is in the FBI files and you can do it government to government. But I can turn it over if you wish. Thank you so much, Bert Samuels.
Thank you again for exposing this one.
Thank you so much, my brother. Now, once again, just to say that, one additional point matters here. Funding. Documents indicate that Jeffrey Epstein was involved to a large extent in funding a research project connected to his visit to Jamaica. We have since found that he did come into Jamaica more than once. And as I keep stressing, funding is not wrongdoing. But when private money enters public institutions, it creates access and influence that must be governed transparently. We know that Jeffrey Epstein is not just a pedophile. And if you want to stick on pedophile, you can go ahead and do that. But he was into eugenics. He was into cloning. He was into biometric data, collecting biometric data on the best in Africa, in the Caribbean. And Jamaica was a place that has been identified as one of the areas that he funded this kind of genetic research. And this is why we are concerned. Lots of questions to be asked, and we want them answered. Once funding is documented, it becomes a legitimate governance question. Transparency around money projects, institutions and individuals alike, it is our right. Freedom of information, ATI, However we get this information, we get it, and as Bert Samuels is saying, a commission of inquiry. Epstein funded many projects. Why are we singling this one out? We're singling this one out because this project involves Jamaican public institutions and athletes. And that gives us the right, the Jamaican public, to understand how the funding and oversight worked in this specific case. We know more than we are saying. The research has shown something frightening. And we're leaving this in your hands. I'm going to stay on this. But the government of Jamaica, public institutions, the University of the West Indies, UTEC, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Information and Technology. Get your people immediately. If you want my research, I'm willing to give it to you, because I've done a whole lot already. But the documents are out there. They're taking them down even as we speak. But I have screenshot many of them, saved many of them, printed many of them. And so these documents are available. Questions must be answered. Why did Jeffrey Epstein come into Jamaica? He was invited. What was happening at the time he was invited, and who invited him? These are questions that we must answer. All of this, though, is already available in the public domain. All you have to do is go to the DOJ website, click on the Epstein Library, and begin to do your research. They're going to ask you if you're 18 years and over. Click yes if you are. Type in the names you want, because you use keywords. So type in a name and go fishing. There is enough there to make you vomit. There is enough to make you faint. And there is enough to make you angry. And so the government of Jamaica has a question to answer. This research has been running from 1996. So it is every political party, from P.J. Patterson to Portia Simpson-Miller to Bruce Golding to Andrew Holness. And I'm not saying that they're responsible for anything. I'm saying that guest, Dr. Rosemary Mealy. Dr. Rosemary Mealy is an activist, educator, and author. She has been acknowledged for her long history of engaged community activism and contributions to artistic innovation, education, scholarly endeavors, and international human rights struggles. Dr. Mealy is a longtime friend of Cuba. She's also lived and worked in that country as an internationalist and journalist at Radio Havana, Cuba. Her participation in international forums with non-governmental organizations has garnered global recognition and respect for her advocacy in defense of U.S. political prisoners, gender equality, and the illegal imposition of U.S. economic and political sanction against sovereign nations, including Cuba. I'm not quite sure if we have Dr. Mealy online, but we are standing by to talk to her about the ongoing situation in Cuba. As you heard from Professor Saini, there is an ongoing situation where there is no rationing in Cuba. Government ministers said the measures would guarantee fuel supply for key sectors, including agricultural production, education, water supply, healthcare, and defense. And we're hearing from Commerce Minister Oscar Perez Olivia, who's defiant and has said that this is an opportunity and a challenge that Cuba has no doubt that they'll overcome. And I'll quote him directly, quote, "This is an opportunity and a challenge that we have no doubt we will overcome. We are not going to collapse." In the meantime, what do we do on the island here in Jamaica? How are we viewing what's happening in Cuba? Do we understand the extent to which the situation in Cuba is a genocide that's happening on our doorstep? a deliberate and planned genocide, criminal activity happening on our doorstep right now. There's a blockade. Cuba has been put in a chokehold by the United States government. Donald Trump, the president, and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. This has always been Marco Rubio's plan. Rubio is so close to Jamaica and the Dominican Republic that it is frightening. He comes in and out of Jamaica when it suits him, and we're told what good friends we are with the United States and with Marco Rubio. But here we are, our grandparents, our aunties, our uncles, our neighbors in a chokehold by the United States government, led by Donald Trump, and of course by Marco Rubio. Online with me now, and we just told you who she is, Professor Rosemary Mealy. No stranger to the program. Dr. Mealy, thank you so much, my sister, for joining us again inside of the Africa Forum.
Oh, good morning to you, sister, and to all my brothers and sisters in Jamaica. Good morning. I'm so happy. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to come on today.
We're very happy to have you. The situation in Jamaica is that there is a core in Jamaica who understands what's happening in Cuba, and are talking about it in our little groups and so on. There is no public outcry. Jamaicans, I think, are not so much aware that this is happening, and you wonder how come. But that is our current situation. Can you bring us up to speed, up to date? Because I know you are in direct contact with Cuba. We just spoke with Professor Saini, and he kind of gave us a historical context of what we're looking at now. But as in terms of what's happening on the ground today in Cuba, can you give us an idea as to what you're hearing and how Cuba is dealing with this blockade and this chokehold that has been put on it by the United States?
Okay, well, thank you so much. Yes, I'm glad you had Professor Saini on, because I'm sure he did a great job with the history. We are relying here in the U.S., we have a pretty good solidarity movement with Cuba that allows us to have this direct contact to the point that we are still sending delegations to Cuba, which is great, and I would hope that our brothers and sisters in Jamaica would do likewise. They're taking material aid, humanitarian aid, and I think that's very important. I think right now with the issue of the fuel, this is a very serious situation, because sanctions against Cuba now have moved to what is called an overt strangulation, meaning that the problem with the question of Trump saying that tariffs will be held on countries that trade with Cuba after, of course, the illegal kidnapping of President Maduro from Venezuela and his wife. And so therefore the fuel situation is dire. But what is happening is the government at Cuba is not going to step back. And that's important for our people to know. They will not give up. So what has happened now is Cuba has rolled out rationing plans as the United States moved to block fuel. That doesn't mean that life will stop going on. It just means that there are cutbacks. There's a reality that this is the situation and we are going to survive. And I think that that's the message that Cuba is giving to its own people. It's being honest, and it's telling us in the world that it's time to step up now and to show our solidarity. And so that's basically what's happening. There's rationing, there's a fuel situation, there's situation with the food, but the government is aware of that. I lived in Cuba many years ago during the time that was known as the special period when the Russians left. And the Cubans are resilient, but of course oil is very important in terms of moving the economy, moving the transportation, but they are resilient. And the other thing is Cuba has reached out and says, yes, we will negotiate, but it's on terms that's not going to allow us to be trampled upon as we're seeing and being bullied, So I think that's very important.
And Cuba has said that we'll negotiate, and we've heard from the United States President, Donald Trump, who has said we are talking to Cuba, but then Cuba is also saying no, they're not talking to us. What do you make of this?
Well, I think Donald Trump does double talk. Everything that he does is foundational on deals. making deals. Cuba is not about to make a deal of handing over its sovereignty. It'll have talks about, the whole question of immigration. It'll have discussions around the issue of these tariffs around the oil. It will have discussions that are based on respect. And I think that that's something that this country doesn't recognize, that it's not about giving up its sovereignty. But like with any international negotiations, it's a give and take. But fundamentally, because of the Helms-Burton law in this country, negotiations would mean that Cuba would give up its sovereignty, that it would give up its right to have the kind of government that it has chosen over, for the past 60 plus years. It's not about giving that up. It's about negotiating on honest terms. And I think particularly the first term is to lift the blockade, to stop the strangulation. That's important. And I think that, that's something, and any country will want that. As I remember years ago, as I was a young person and I was following what was happening in Jamaica, when President Manley was in power, you had to give up your bauxite to the International Monetary Fund.
Yes,
you lost your sovereignty. You lost your sovereignty. Yes. And Cuba is not about doing that. But it's honest, and it will negotiate with the United States, but it will negotiate on terms that recognizes its right to sovereignty.
We've heard from the Commerce Minister, and I just quoted him saying, this is an opportunity and a challenge that we have no doubt that we will overcome. We are not going to collapse. So that ties right into the point you're making, that Cuba is not about to give up its sovereignty.
No, and we're hearing, everybody's saying that Cuba is ready to collapse. I mean, that is what we're hearing. That's the news. That's the corporate news putting that out. It's not ready to collapse. It's under siege. Let's acknowledge that. But it has, as I said, it has moved into a situation where it's rolled out a plan for the weeks to deal with the fuel shortages. It's moved, tensions obviously are spiraling inside of the United States with these tariffs. But it's not collapsing. People need to know that. Life is going on. Like I said, we're encouraging delegations to go, fact-finding tours to go. And Jamaica is in a very unique situation in that you can travel to Cuba. Wherein in the United States, we have stipulations on how we can travel to Cuba legally. We can only go under 12 categories. But for major people like us, we have to travel under a category called support for the Cuban people. And so,
yes.
So we go. But I mean, I want the Caribbean people to understand that you are in a unique situation. And please, I mean, we're doing what we can do here in the United States, but our brothers and sisters are in it's a dire situation. Lights, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon. That's a difficult situation for the people to live under, to be able to cook, to be able to move freely in the streets and what have you. So, despite, like you just said, despite the fact that there's this chokehold under the country at this point and Cuba being under siege, life is going on. And these sanctions, it's like overt strangulation. That's really what it is. And so what we have to do now is to support Cuba in whatever way that we can, and particularly the humanitarian aspect of it.
All right. I want to come back to that. Let me take a quick break. How can we support and what are your suggestions for at Cuba? And we're asking in this segment of the program, what can we do? Professor Mealy, one of the things you said, my sister, just now, is that Jamaica is in a unique position because we can still travel to Cuba. Last time I went, we had to go through the United States, but there are still flights leaving directly from Jamaica to Cuba. Last time I checked also. There is a situation on the island where Jamaica has said that from a governmental perspective, Jamaica said it has taken a side, and it took a side a long time ago. It didn't say which side, but we see how things are playing out. Marco Rubio comes and he goes as he wills, and he says that Jamaica and the U.S. has a really strong relationship. So we can, from that, we can deduce that the side that Jamaica has taken. So we are in lockstep with the United States. But I hear you also saying the people of Jamaica can do something. talk to us about, because you have a long experience and history of this kind of activism. And I know people are listening asking, how can we do and what can we do? What would you suggest in terms of how Jamaicans can move on this, on helping Cuba?
Okay, thank you so much, Sister. Well, one thing is, I talked about the government is prioritizing the food, food as well as the fuel rationing. But one of the things that they're maintaining is access to tourism. Tourism is still alive in Cuba. So the tourism sector and key export industries such as cigar production, which I know Jamaicans love Cuban cigars, that continues. You'll be able to trade. You're going to be able to, you can continue to trade with Cuba, which is very important. And I think also that the humanitarian aid piece is important, that when people, the churches can play a key role. There's a Martin Luther King Center in Havana that many people do not know about. It's a multi-denomination program that serves the Cuban people. Church groups can organize to take basic food there. You can take rice and beans, and you can take a cargo if you like. You can still do that. You can take suitcases full of over-the-counter medications, and you can take them to hospitals. You can organize that, and you're in a unique situation also, Sister. You have hundreds of Jamaicans who have graduated from the Cuban ELAM, an incredible medical school there. Yes. And of course, we know that many of the CARICOM countries now are caving in, calling in their students, but Jamaica still has students who are studying there on scholarship. I would encourage those students to come out and make a statement, because you benefited from the Cuban education, the medical education. So I think it would be great for those students to return with brigades full of medical supplies. That's a great thing. And you have to use those avenues. And I think also that it's important, it's so important that Jamaica not cave in, as some of the other Caribbean countries have, in terms of stopping the contracts that exist with the medical school and the medical the global medical program that's so great. And because I know, and that's one thing that Rubio did, he traveled throughout the Caribbean and he told those countries to stop allowing their counterparts to study in Cuba. We saw that happen with Barbados, not Barbados, I'm sorry, Grenada. All of those countries are being targeted. So I really encourage, the travel piece is important. The carrying of material aid, humanitarian aid is still important. And also just to speak out, to write articles in the newspaper, to get op-ed pieces. Those are very important things, because we are looking at here in the U.S., we are looking at our African brothers and sisters in the Caribbean to see how we can have some kind of relationship with you. Maybe we can send things to Jamaica. Like during the hurricane, we did that. We send things to you, and then you transport them there. So that's important, because there was one time when we couldn't even fly to Havana, so we had to come to Jamaica and take a flight to Havana. I think for African people, those are the basic things that we can do. And let's remember, when Africa called, it was Cuba that answered. Now Cuba is calling, and we have to answer. So that's, it may sound symbolic, but it means so much.
No, and I can just imagine. And one of the things you talked about here just now was over-the-counter drugs. I mean, people are not even thinking about this. The extent to which this blockade, this stranglehold that the U.S. has put on Cuba as impacted pharmaceuticals, just things for flu. I mean, we have some really bad flu, for example, going around now in the Caribbean. So I mean, simple things like that. But I know that there's so many ways that Jamaicans can get to Cuba, because we are so close. And I'd really hope that from this morning's program, people begin to think about how they can make a difference, what you can do and how you can do it. What can you tell us about what's happening in the education sector? Because you talked just now about so many of our students who have studied in Cuba, and some still remain. But what's happening there generally?
Well, that's what's so great about how the government has put a plan in to function and to continue. Education is continuing, the continuation of the operation of schools. That's going to be maintained. There's going to be especially in the full primary education. That's a focus with hybrid systems using technology. That's going to continue. So the leadership of the country has affirmed that Cuba will not collapse. I mean, it's prioritizing structurally how they're going to deal with the fuel thing, because since December, multiple tankers headed for Cuba, and they were seized by the U.S. naval forces in the Caribbean, right? Yes. Many people don't know that. So, but Cuba has announced these sweeping full rationing measures designed to protect essential services. And that includes, like I said earlier, education, healthcare, tourism, and also implementing other hybrid systems of implementing education and what have you at a higher level. So, and the other thing is thousands of Cubans are marching and right in front of the U.S. Embassy. These are organized, youth groups and what have you, coming out and challenging in their own country, standing in front of the U.S. Embassy or intersection in Havana and really raising their voices, and so just a small mobilization in Jamaica, in Kingston. Cuba needs to know that it has friends, that it still has friends. And so just a little things like that, even just your voice, is important. Even if you can't get there, mobilize a street rally or something. For us, it's almost illegal to do that in this country now. So you're still quote unquote independent. Yeah, I should say.
Well, you should. I'm going to have to talk to you off air because Jamaica has made a choice between sovereignty, independence, and whatever we have going on here. Hold for me, Sister Rosemary. Let me take a quick break. I'll be right back. And how we can help. This is what we're looking at, solutions in this category, in this segment of the program, and practical solutions. You've got your little boats, and you know what you do with your little boats. There's an armada, Sister Rosemary, in the Caribbean waters, and boats are being shot out of the waters, and people are being killed. Fishermen who used to go all the way to Cuba are scared. People are afraid. And how do we factor this? Even afraid to reach out to our neighbors.
Right. Well, we found out that those armadas and what was happening, that was under the guise that they were stopping drugs, right? We found out that was a lie, that really the whole idea was to frighten people, and then eventually it culminated with the kidnapping of the Venezuelan president, and we knew that was all about oil. Yeah. So we understand that was a lie and a smokescreen. But I think that, the traveling there right now is mainly, I guess the safest way is air travel. You can still do that. That's really important. So folks get together. Even if it's just 3 or 4 delegations going, the other thing too, that to find ways through, I know we know CARICOM is, it's like a joke. We're laughing, yes. But there's still some forms within there who still believe that we can still do things and that we can still assert our sovereignty. The other thing I wanted to say, that basic things of sending to Cuba is like flashlights and lamps, as solar panel lamps, solar powered lamps. That's important. The other thing is Cuba has moved to divert away from fuel fossil by they have solar farms, but they purchase those solar power things from China, and that costs money. And so you could have, I know we're strapped for resources right now, but we go back to the old way of having events and fundraisers where we can raise money and we can
but sorry to interrupt, Sister Rosemary, but you've made a really good point, and this is important for us. We've just come through Hurricane Melissa, and we got a lot of that solar, and I know there are many Jamaicans who still don't have, but we can go in and share. I know in Jamaica we've got storehouses of stuff. That stuff sent to us by from the U.S., from across the world, from as far as Ghana and Rwanda, you name it. So that I think that we have enough to share with Cuba. We have containers upon containers that are still not opened. Solar panels are lying around. Solar lamps are lying around. And this may be one way to go. How do we share with Cuba?
Absolutely, and you still have the Cuban embassy is there, and you make connections with the comrades who can help to suggest ways in getting those things there. I know we collected here while we were collecting for Cuba here. We had a project where we were sending you things. We were sending things to Jamaica, so we reached out, and of course Cuba has reached out to Jamaica and all of the Caribbean, even within the 60 plus years of this U.S. blockade, It has still always reached out with what it has, and we have to remember that. If nothing more, as those with strong, nationalist tendencies, these are black folk in Cuba, folk, and we need to reach out and show our support, that what happens to our brothers and sisters there impact us. And I think, the other thing, sister, people have to realize that, they say, well, why has the United States continued to have this 60-plus year blockade against the country? That's 3 generations of Cubans have grown up not knowing anything but a blockade, and they know how to sacrifice. But I think that what's more, and these are not theoretical propositions that I'm putting out. These are real things. These are real human kinds of things that we do when our brothers and sisters need us. And so all of us are on the yoke of this government. I mean, here in the U.S., they're killing citizens who demonstrating around this whole issue of immigration, and so we have to understand that we go through the same thing that you go through, but only at a different level. And things have not reached the point where we cannot communicate. When they cut off the communication channels, then you know that it's serious. But we can still communicate to each other,
And I know you don't have a looking glass, but I know that you... this is something you've been looking on for years from a scholarly perspective, also from an activist perspective. How do you see this playing out, considering what's happened in Venezuela, the Armada that's still in the Caribbean, and Marco Rubio in the picture?
Well, you know what? This may sound like so simplistic, but the other day I was talking to my 20-year-old granddaughter, right? And I was saying to her, as young people, what do you think about the future? Do you feel how do you view the future? Do you view it as something that's not good? And she said, Abuela, something, as long as you have hope, that's resistance. As long as we have hope, that's resistance. Because once you give up hope, then the enemy, the empire, knows that there's not going to be a fight back, right? And so just we have to call on, the future is believing that we can have a different kind of world. That is what the Cubans hold on to. They do not give up that there cannot be a different kind of world. And that's one of the major lessons that you learn. And you saw that yourself when you were there. The resilience. And I think that that's something that we have to call on, and even during the most difficult times, we have to maintain hope that there can be a different kind of world. Now, I'm not saying that things are not going to get bad or worse. They will. But the point is, the Cubans are saying there's no option for them. We have no options other than to resist. And I think that that's the greatest lesson that we can learn. So this whole thing about regime change efforts in Cuba, it's kind of like being modeled after the maximum pressure campaigns that were used against Iran, the military in Venezuela, all of that. So the threat of a U.S. military attack is no longer, it's not rhetorical, right? And it's used to, but it has worked in opposite ways in Cuba, because what it has done nothing more but to drum up Cuba's nationalism, right?
Yes.
So when you drum up nationalism, that means that even the people inside who may disagree, they're coming together, right, to figure out strategically kind of options that they need to have in order to survive.
And I think that's a critical point.
That's my vision.
Yeah, it's a very good point to make. I reference this, Cuba, one of the most sanctioned countries in the world. A similar thing with Russia, if you will. But out of sanctions and Iran, we see this kind of nationalism emerging, but also a new financial system bypassing the sanctionable spaces, which is also something to pay attention to. I don't know how Cuba fits into this, but we see what's happening with BRICS, for example.
Yes,
you're thinking on that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because I mean, BRICS is it's a challenge, right? It's an operation that's still in progress.
Yes.
We have to look at it that way.
Yes.
And I think that that's important and that's what's so threatening to the United States, right? I mean, the dollar it's the value of the dollar should not be the commodity, that should not be the currency that the world has to use, because that's the capitalist currency that has put the world in the situation that it's in. So we have to encourage BRICS. You know, I was speaking to the Cuban ambassador a couple of days ago, and I asked him what did he think about it at this moment, and he said it's a work in progress, and as long as it's in a work in progress, then it can happen. It can happen.
Yes.
And so, you know, and I'm not an economist, but I certainly see where if it moves and it develops, and I think I have to say Barbados is really taking a lot of even though we may have, you know, political differences there, but they're speaking out, you know, and they realize the significance of that. Of course, in BRICS, you know, there are states in there that, you know, line closely with the United States.
Of course.
But of course,
yeah.
But it's a power, you know, it's a power broker. And that's important.
To what extent is what's happening to Cuba a threat to the Caribbean, even especially those who was so closely hugging Marco Rubio in the United States? I mean, Cuba is part of us. This has to be a threat, not just to Cuba, but to all of us.
Yes, I mean, when you look at a country where, and I'm just going to compare to the United States, okay, where you look at a country where you only have 1.39% of unemployment, and in the United States it's 3.60. When you look at a country where there's no homelessness, and in this country it's bordering somewhere 750 to 800,000 people, you know, I would just say that. You live in a country where health care is free. And in this country, we're struggling just to survive daily. So, you know, when you do these comparisons, how could Cuba be a threat when you look at the advances that it has made? And I think that that's a very important lesson. We know that during COVID, because Cuba is not able to trade on the international market, it found its own COVID vaccines that it shared throughout the Caribbean and throughout the world. So how could a country be a threat that advances in areas that we can't even advance under the kind of systems that we live in? I mean, illiteracy. Cuba has a literacy rate of 99%, and even in this country, it's 88, maybe more. And, you know, these figures that I'm quoting, they're from the World Bank. You know what I mean? So when we talk about Cuba being a threat, it is a threat because it represents how you can develop in a country that does not use its model of development based on a capitalist-oriented system. It's a more humanitarian system. I'm not saying that there aren't any problems in Cuba. I'm not saying that, you know, but I'm saying that it allows the opportunity for humanity to emerge to the level where you can really be a human. And that's what we're looking, that's the kind of society we want. So why would that be a threat, you know? So
the extent to which we are, and the rest of the Caribbean and CARICOM is really a disappointment here. And not that it was created to be any much more than it is, but at least you expect a kind of a unity at a time of crisis, which instead we're seeing a splintering. But the extent to which we remain splintered, and the extent to which we participate in the genocide of our own selves, the strangulation of our own selves, to me, this is, it's phenomenal that this is the path that we seem to be taking.
Yeah, we want a path of development of what we saw happening on Gaza. I mean, we're still watching children dying from starvation. Is that the kind of path to development that we want in our own countries? You know, do we want, and we call it, you know, legally we call it economic genocide. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what's happening in Cuba. The attempt is to insert that. Is that the kind of, I mean, just think about this. Marco Rubio is telling our brothers and sisters to stop the global health partnership that exists. Those global health partnerships have saved millions of lives in our countries. There's nobody's hearing that if you pull out the global health projects, and that's, you know, the doctors and the nurses who are in your country, if you take them out, what happens to our people? The United States is not going to bring, we have a nurse right here in New York. For this last 6 weeks, we have nurses who are on strike, you know. Mm-hmm. So what I'm really trying to share is this, that are we going to opt for the kind of system that helps to show that the empire is crumbling? Do we want to be a part of that? Or do we want to grow out of its ashes, you know, in a sense? And so that's it. We are in a situation right now where we can either align ourselves with the empire and go down with it, right? Or we can align ourselves with the purposes of humanity. And I think that that's what Cuba represents. It represents a sense of humanity and a survival of humanity. Fidel used to talk about that all the time. You know, humanity's survival, you know, and we are watching the devastation of what this country is doing to around the world. So do we want to align ourselves with that? Do we want to collaborate with that? As Martin Luther King would say, you know, like, you have to speak up now. If you don't, you find yourself being a part of the collusion process. And I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want generations, if they don't try to erase the history, and which they're trying to do. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be a part right now of this part of humanity that's allowing the bullying to tell me that I need to decide who my friends are, you know, because is a green card worth that? Is a green card worth, not a green card, but having access to come to this country, is it really worth that? I mean, you're coming to this country, and then you come here and you're not looked upon as, you know, you're just a part of nations. They call you, what did Trump call it? You know, he's already told us what he thinks of us. Yeah. You know,
yes. So, and these are really great points and questions that you're posing. I can literally hear the silence in the nation just listening to you, because these are choices we have to make. And today is as good a day as any to make make that choice.
Is a visa to the United States worth coming to a place that has no respect for you? Is a visa really worth that much? You know, to leave where you can grow food, where you can have your own development, where you can have your own sun, and you can develop you know, your solar energy, where you have the sun there. We don't have it here. You know, it's cold here. I'm in New York. It's almost below zero. I mean, is a visa worth that? Is a visa worth your children coming to a country where the educational system is almost, you know, like I said, the literacy rate? I mean, because that's what is being thrown at our people, that yes, cave in, align yourself with the empire, and you can have A, B, C, and D. But yet, when you have A, B, C, and D, we see what happened in Haiti. You know, we see what happened in Venezuela with the stealing the natural resources. You know, so people, we have to wake up at this moment. These are critical moments, and perhaps Cuba is being used at this moment. We never know what the ancestors have in store for us, right? Yes. But Cuba is being used at this moment to say to us, do we want life or do we want death? Literally, you know.
My sister.
Death in many ways. Yes.
Go ahead. No, I was going to end it there, but please finish your sentence.
No, but those are the choices. We are faced with some serious choices here, and they're not theoretical choices. They're real life choices. So that's why we need to support the people of Cuba, and we need to do everything in our power. We need to let our governments know that it's not worth giving up your rights, your autonomy, and your sovereignty just for the interest of a few dollars that are thrown back to you and they're going to take your resources, because that's what it's really all about.
That's what it comes down to. That is what it comes down to. Thank you so much, my sister, my beloved sister, Dr. Rosemary Mealy. As usual, serious food for thought in the spaces, and we are going to be reflecting on this. We have to make a choice.
Thank you so much for coming on, brothers and sisters. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, my sister, Professor Rosemary Mealy. You too, Professor Rosemary Mealy. Isn't that food for thought, though, as we begin to determine that the choices we're faced with are not many. On the one hand, it's to live. On the other, it's genocide. It's to die. You know, quite a bit happening this Reggae Month and Black History Month. Well, before I tell you that, my sister, Dr. Imani Tafari Amma, has written an excellent article. It's published in the newspapers today. Imani Tafari Amma, U.S. Immigration Policy and the Old Wounds of Separation, published February 8. In the Gleaner, Imani Tafari Amma, U.S. Immigration Policy and the Old Wound of Immigration. Get your copy and read it. And, I'm saying get your copy of the Gleaner and read it, If I'm reading from the Gleaner, I quote that I'm reading from the Gleaner. If I'm reading from the Observer, I quote that I'm reading from the Observer. But when the Gleaner takes your story and takes your research and move it along, which is great, we love that, you should give credit to a journalist's research. I'm just saying that to the Gleaner. Okay? All right. So lots being said there by my sister Imani. She talks about the abrupt halting of visa processing is not merely an immigration issue. It is a mirror held up to the unequal global order, one in which the lives and futures of people in the global south can be paused, redirected or discarded at will until this imbalance is named, challenged and repaired. The promise of mobility will remain conditional and the wounds of separation, old and new, will continue to reopen. It's a great article. I'm not quite sure why this CD is playing like this, I'm going to have to fix this situation because we're getting from it only what? Okay, is that better? No, not even better. All right, I'm going to take the break and come back. Oh, I did say that there are Michael, now for me to find, Michael Barnett is producing quite a bit actually for Black History Month. Stephen Golding also. Okay, so I'm seeing Stephen. All right, Stephen, this looks like it might be coming also from Michael. So great. So this one says the Faculty of Social Sciences, Sociology, Psychology and Social Work, UWI, the Department of Sociology, Psychology and Social Work, Faculty of Social Sciences, in collaboration with the Universal Negro Improvement Association, the UNIA, present Black History Month series, the first in the series of special 100th anniversary commemorative Black History Month panel sessions, and that's happening tomorrow. The first is happening tomorrow, February 9, 6 to 9 p.m. at the Multifunction Room, Main Library, UWI Mona Campus. So let me tell you who will be on: Professor Rupert Lewis, Professor Vereen Shepherd, Stephen Golding, Professor Clinton Hutton, Dr. Michael Barnett is a moderator, and Dr. Y. Archer Njidi. Ya Asantwa looks like she's in the island. Ya Asantwa, it look like you're there. All right, cultural performances by History Man and Mikey General. So that's tomorrow at UWI at the Multifunction Room, Main Library, UWI Mona Campus. The first in the series of special 100th anniversary commemorative Black History Month panel sessions happening tomorrow. Time again, 6 to 9 p.m. I know there's something else, Michael, so if you get a chance, send that to me also. So I'm getting this one from Stephen, and I know there's another one. Stephen Golding, you also sent me another one, Stephen, and I'm not quite sure where this is going to be. All right, so it's Thursday, February 12th, Trinity Baptist Church. Okay, 1601 Druid Hill Avenue, Baltimore. So if you're in Baltimore, go and check that out. Stephen Golding. Looks like, will you be there, Stephen? The Nubian Jack Community Trust is putting that on, it looks like. And that's happening in Baltimore on the 12th, 6 p.m., Trinity Baptist Church, 1601 Druid Hill Avenue, Baltimore. All right. Every time. Baltimore. Baltimore every time. I don't know why I'm thinking of Nina Simone just now. If I could have found a Nina Simone, I'll certainly play it. Oh, let me take a break. Seeing the responses to the court's decision on the murder. Murder is a legal term, and as journalists we know that only the court decides murder. But we've come way past that. The murder of Melissa Silvera. There has been a confession and a plea deal. And I know that if you're going to have the conversation from a legal perspective, it's going to sound like Law and Order on TV. A lot of people are emotional about this, not buying into the legal arguments at all, and asking questions about justice in Jamaica. Two-tier justice. What justice looks like for those who belong to a certain order, and what justice looks like for those who don't. And people are right to question the plea deal that was made with Julian Silvera, who confessed to the killing of his wife. When you read the report, even the press release about where the shots were in the autopsy, where the shots were located, it is enough to make you want to scream. Why? Why? And why did that happen? But also why a plea deal of manslaughter? I know people are really emotional about that, and I think they have every right to be. So the press release is out there. Part of it says, upon hearing the pleas entered by Mr. Silvera, the prosecution indicated to the court that the defense would have to provide the basis on which it is asking the prosecution to accept a plea to the lesser offense of manslaughter, as it did not arise on the prosecution's case. And it goes on to talk about what happened on the 3rd day of February. Mr. Silvera was repleaded on count 1 of the indictment, and to which he pleaded not guilty of using a firearm to commit felony to wit, etc., etc. And then saying he pled guilty to using a firearm to commit a felony to wit, manslaughter. And then it goes on to tell you what happened. On the night of the 2nd day of February 2026, the defense provided a statement authored and signed by Mr. Silvera to the prosecution. The statement, in summary, was on the night of the 10th day of November 2023, Mr. Silvera and his wife, the deceased, had an argument which got physical. He indicated that during the argument she blamed him, as she always did, for the death of their young son. He went on to state that during the argument she hurled several expletives at him and made derogatory statements about his sister and mother, which he found to be provocative. He stated further that during the argument, she made a comment about their children, which he found to be the final straw, and at that point he lost control, discharged his weapon in her direction. He goes on to talk about that, and he talks about the autopsy, and that is where it gives you the chill, because you're talking about 3 shots in the lower abdomen, and that the fact, well, let me read it. It says, fact, sometime after 10:30 p.m. on the 10th day of November 2023, Julian Silvera told his wife, Mrs. Silvera, and the children that he was leaving to attend a meeting and that he would return the following day. Mrs. Silvera told him he could not leave, and an argument ensued, extracted from a statement of the 2 children they shared. The adults swore at each other and then he left. Sometime before 6 a.m. on the 11th day of November 2023, one of the children, who was 10 years of age at the time, went into the parents' bedroom and discovered his mother's lifeless body on the floor next to her bed. The child, the 10-year-old. He noticed that there was blood coming from her orifices and that her dress was covered with blood. He ran from the bedroom and alerted his brother, who accompanied him back to his parents' bedroom, where they both checked for signs of life from her body. The children checking to see if their mother is dead or alive. They tried to make contact with their father using the Messenger Kit application on their digital service and were eventually successful. And they talk about the father coming home and so on and so forth. And the first responder was an officer of a Stony Hill police station, arrived at the house and went into the bedroom where he saw the body of Melissa Silvera. He took a photograph of the body with his Samsung cellular telephone, and Mr. Silvera cried out. He had Mr. Silvera cover the nude section of the body. The first responder did not further examine the body as Mr. Silvera was crying. And so they talk about, the body being taken to the morgue and so on. A post-mortem examination was scheduled to take place on the 1st day of December. On this date, the pathologist discovered that there were scars on the body. The post-mortem examination was conducted on the 15th day of December 2023. The pathologist noted that there were 3 gunshot wounds, 1 perforating gunshot wound to the front of the right thigh, 1 penetrating gunshot wound to the left side of the lower abdomen, and a 3rd is a superficial penetrating gunshot wound to the right side of the lower abdomen. Pathologists removed 2 projectiles from her body, which were handed over to the police. The pathologist opined that the immediate cause of death was multiple gunshot wounds. There's a reason why Jamaican people talk about a 2-tier justice system, and this is one of them. If you go online right now, especially on X, Jamaican people are talking about the Lodge. They're talking about Freemason. They're talking about Kiwanis. They're talking about clubs. They're talking about all of these cultish organizations that are on the island, where the rich and famous hang out, and it doesn't matter which party you belong to, you are one of us. But mainly Jamaican people are talking about the Lodge, and they're talking about Freemason. There is a reason why Jamaican people have gone there, because you're seeking a place to anchor the anger and the pain and the hurt and the whatever else is coming at this, because it looks the way it looks and it sounds the way it sounds. And Jamaican people are having a very hard time digesting the plea deal. And they're asking many questions. Is provocation then a defense? And if you read the legal briefs, I think that's a whole other kettle of tea. And they can't believe that everybody accepted it. And this is what Jamaican people are talking about. Because it does read and feel like injustice. And you still want to say justice for Melissa Silvera. and justice for all women who are in domestic abusive situations. So we need time to come to terms with this plea deal. And you all are going to have to give us time. And until we're well, I don't think we'll be satisfied. Only time can take care of the righteous indignation that we feel about this plea deal. Only time, and no time soon, because I am one of the Jamaican people who are feeling this way. You know, how much time do I have? Talk about time. I wanted to play for you the researcher who conducted the research, the scientific research on the elite athletes, at least part of it.
Michala Atite Gusta. Now to return to a language I actually speak, namely English, I want to tell you about work I've been doing on sprinters and what factors are associated with excellence in sprinting. By sprinting, I mean running a 100 and a 200 meter dash. All of this work was done in Jamaica. Here you can see Jamaica's elite sprinter, the top sprinter in the world, Usain Bolt. And what my work shows is that his knees are apt to be an important part of his success. My work shows that the more symmetrical the knees are, the faster people run. By symmetrical, I mean more alike. So when you're perfectly symmetrical, that means the knees have the identical same size. If you're very asymmetrical, it means one knee might be fat and the other thin. So what I am going to show you is that knees play a unique role in sprinting speed, namely symmetry of knees. Now, the first piece of work we did was on Jamaican children, which we did in 1996. I brought down an international crew from England, various parts of the U.S. and so on, top scientists, to measure 280 Jamaican children, ages 5 to 11 roughly, from head to toe for bodily symmetry. And we measured everything, including their teeth and so on. But we also measured their external morphology. As you can see here, John Manning, who is the dean of fluctuating asymmetry, he's one of the top authorities in the world on the subject. He's measuring a girl's ear length with calipers. And he'll measure the other ear, and then she'll be cycled through about 15 students later. They'll cycle her through again. John has forgotten her. He's forgotten her ears. So it's an independent measurement. So for every trait, for every child, we have two independent measurements, and that makes the correlation stronger because the average is better than the two independent measures. Likewise, we measured elbows. And this is Randy Thornhill, who's also done excellent work on symmetry, again using calipers, again measuring the girl's elbows, and once again she'll go through and be remeasured by him. The whole point of the long-term study was to follow them into the future and see what symmetry at this age correlated with in the future. And the further into the future, the better. So in 2010, which is to say 14 years after we did our original study, we actually did some races. And we were going to do 100 meter and 200 meter, but we didn't have the space, so it ended up being 90 meters and 180. And we weren't even testing for fluctuating asymmetry. We were testing for second to fourth digit ratio, which correlates with endurance, and our work showed that as well. But John Manning one evening is sitting there looking through the old data from the symmetry, and we had also measured, in addition to elbows and ears and so on, we had measured knees, ankles, and feet. So he looked and he checked, and whoa! It jumped out of his data that every other variable was irrelevant. Feet have nothing to do with how fast you run. Ankles were not showing any correlation with how fast you run. But if your knees were symmetrical when you were 8 years old, then when you were 22, you ran faster. And that was true for males and females alike. And it was true for both the 90-meter dash and the 180-meter dash. We then came back in the year 2006 and remeasured all the children again. And in general, if you were symmetrical earlier, you were symmetrical later, but there was variation and so on. When you combined the two measures, you got an even stronger correlation for the 100-meter dash, showing that symmetry for the two combined predicted running ability. So far as we know, this is the first time anybody has ever measured a trait and predicted running speed, other than running speed. We never measured running speed in these children. A trait other than running speed, and then have that trait predict 14 years later who's going to be a good runner. So that was such a striking finding that we raised the money to study the elite sprinters of Jamaica. And the sprinters in Jamaica are elite. They're the best in the world. So we partnered with the MVP Track and Field Club in Kingston, which has 2/3 of the top runners on the island. And here's an example, for example, of the men working out, running a 100-meter dash. You don't see the full 100 meters, but they're working out in preparation for leaving for Europe. Here's how we measure knees, and this is Bernhard Fink from Germany, and he's extremely good, extremely careful. And you can see that he looks for the condyle, a depression on the side of your knee, and he looks for the same depression on the other side. He fits his calipers to it. He reads off a number to a graduate student. He turns and measures the same thing on this man's knees. And just like with our children in 96, we wait and cycle these athletes through 15 athletes later. So he measures them twice, so we get a more accurate measurement. So this is the measurements, and we also measured ankles and feet, but it was only knees we expected to be significant. What did we find out? First of all, as scientists, we like to compare elite sprinters with a control group. That's average Jamaicans. Are they different at least than average Jamaicans? And the answer there is, yes indeed, they are different than average Jamaicans because they are more symmetrical. You can see the white is for the elite athletes and the cross-hatch thing is for average Jamaicans. And the white center line is lower than for knees than for average Jamaicans. That's highly significant. The ankles of the sprinters are more symmetrical. Feet, no effect at all. It is irrelevant to the correlation. Then we looked at different events. On the far left is 100 meters, and then come the hurdles and the jumps. And basically, there's no real difference in the ankles or the knees of those two. But for races that are more than 100 meters long, the knee symmetry increases. They're not as symmetrical, and the ankle asymmetry increases quite a bit. As usual, the feet just move around and don't say a thing. So symmetry, we believe, is more important or more visible in the short races because those are straight out races. 100 meters, straight out. Symmetrical the whole time. 200 meters, you turn twice. 400 meters, you turn 4 times. So you have an asymmetry in there that we believe may be causing the ankles especially to become more asymmetrical on average, but also the knees. Now, then comes the key question. Across these athletes, which are the best in the world, does knee symmetry predict who is the best of the best? And the answer is yes. Are the symmetrical elite Jamaican runners the best? Yes. Their knees are more symmetrical than the knees of the other elite athletes that we measured. Their ankles are almost more symmetrical than the other elite athletes, and their feet are the same. Feet are irrelevant. So that says that knees are important for the elite athletes as well. The more symmetrical, the better a runner you're going to be. Now, here are two individual members of the MVP Track and Field Club, and that's Shelly-Ann Fraser-Price, who is the top female sprinter in the world, 60 meters, 100 meters, 200 meters. She's been the world champion in all of them. And her knees are virtually identical. We really can't tell them apart within a statistical barrier. Next to her is Nesta Carter, who has the 5th fastest 100 meters ever recorded for any man, and he's just taking off, and his knees are highly symmetrical. So these are just two individuals of our group that participated in this work. Now I want to end with a slide that suggests other factors interacting with the knees. This is a 4x100, and this, the Jamaicans set a world record, and the baton has just been passed off to Shelly-Ann. The woman behind her is out of breath, nearly half dead from running. Shelly-Ann takes off with those gorgeous, legs and knees pumping, and you see an interaction here with a West African trait, which is that there's a curvature of the spinal cord such that the rear end tends to stick out a bit, and it results in the knees being able to be lifted higher, among other things, and then pushed further after you push them down. If you look at European sprinters, and I've looked at many, you don't see that effect. She doesn't even have her knees lifted up to 90 degrees. And it's hard to do. But Shelly-Ann has got hers almost to 90 degrees already, and were you to stand her straight up, the knees would be sticking up. So we believe there's an interaction there between West African morphology and knees. We don't claim the Jamaicans have more symmetrical knees than other people. Nobody's ever measured knees in other people, and there's no particular reason to expect it. One last thing I'll say about the Jamaicans and why they're the elite sprinters, and this is entirely a hypothesis, has to do with the variation in West African ancestry. And it turns out the British kept excellent records of where the slaves came from, and they came from Senegal, all the way down the Wolof and the Serra tribes up in Senegal, 800 miles down the coast of Nigeria, the Igbo, the Yoruba, with the Twi from Ghana, with various ones, French, Guyana and so forth and so on, not Guyana, countries in between. So that meant that there was a lot of intermixing of the West African genes among the slave population. Because in West Africa, Yoruba will marry Yoruba, Igbo will marry Igbo. But here in Jamaica, as slaves, they're all thrown together and they breed with each other. And we know from other work that heterozygosity, that is variation in genes, is good. It tends to be positively associated with various variables, including symmetry. So this is a start on a larger project of interest, why Jamaicans in particular. But as part of it, we've shown some very interesting correlations, we hope you'll agree, with knee symmetry. Thank you.
All right, so that's a TED Talk. What's happening to my phone? All right, so that's a TED Talk, right? And the link is available. It's a TED Talk. It's a research done in Jamaica. On the surface of it, it's quite okay. The language is interesting. They come from different places and breed with each other. But the point we're making is that, and you heard he said, he partnered with MVP. We asked Bruce James to come on the program this morning. He says he doesn't work on Sundays. Now, do you work on Sundays, Biggie? Yeah. Do you work on Sundays?
Yes, I do.
You do? You
see, John, because I'm not working on Sunday now.
Oh, that's a bird song. That's a bird song. You found the bird song. Well, so he said that. But here's the thing. There's so much research and investigation that needs to be done. And as I've said, Jeffrey Epstein sponsored a lot. He was one of the main sponsors for this research. He was invited to Jamaica. He did come into Jamaica. Last week when I spoke about this, I didn't know if Epstein had come in. Since then, I've found not just payment for tickets, for landing to the Civil Aviation Authority, but also I've found his flight log. And the flight log I found not in the normal documents, but in the ongoing court case that the FBI still has open, re Jeffrey Epstein. And I have him logged into Montego Bay more than 4 times. All right? And I've got much more information that I have unearthed and investigated that I can give to any commission of inquiry or anybody who wanted. I'm willing to give you all that information. The research has been done. You can continue, but I have the research. Yes, Mr. Begay, how are you doing, sir?
I am wonderful.
Good to see you. Again, to see you, good. Let me see your knees.
Oh, you're checking the
I'm checking the symmetry.
No, did you check yours?
I've checked mine. Perfect symmetry.
Oh, well.
Perfect symmetry. That's why I did so.
When you leave the space, you can become an elite athlete.
Right. Yes. I haven't done any blood tests or any cheek swabs. So that's a whole other thing. The athletes have questions to ask themselves because I don't think they knew that Epstein was the funder for this research. I don't think they had that information. I honestly don't think they knew. I also don't think they necessarily met Jeffrey Epstein, and even if they saw him, they probably didn't know who he was. This is my thinking on this. So the athletes, I think, are pretty innocent.
And when was this done, actually?
So this is a long, big research done over a period of decades. It started in '96. This particular one that he's talking about here, I think, was 2013, 2014.
But that time, perhaps Epstein was not as notorious.
But he was. Remember, 2008 was, we're talking 2013 here, you know.
Oh, okay, right.
So he was very notorious. Okay. He had already served time.
Okay.
And well known as a pedophile. The thing that I'm thinking though is, if the pedophilia is bad, and if you read through the emails and the Epstein file, it is enough to make you sick, right? That is there. So we'll put that one side. But Epstein was also a scientist in his mind, and he was trying to develop an elite human being. And he was using his own sperm, and he was using the wombs of children, 8, 9, 10, to do that. And he was also collecting elite samples because they said they wanted an elite human sample. That's what they were looking for. Mm-hmm. It's in the email, correspondence.
Right.
We can get an elite human sample, and we can get elite human sample from Jamaican athletes. But for what? And I'm not saying that they use it for anything. I'm just saying there are just so many questions around it. Mm-hmm. And then if Epstein was in Jamaica 3, 4, even one time, where did he go? Because the first time there was the ongoing